It all begins on the day a loyal son realizes his entire life was just a setup for the slaughter. As a towering blonde warrior stands victorious over a mountain of corpses, the conqueror turns to the lone survivor dragging himself through the snow, demanding to know why the dark-haired young man abandoned his post, leading the Eastern subjugation force. Despite his shattered body, our boy spits blood and declares he's only here to strike the commander down, leaving the older man to just stare back with absolute ice in his eyes. Planting his massive sword in the drift, the young man accuses his superior of using his entire squad as disposable bait, and screams through the blizzard to call the traitor out as his own father. The blonde patriarch doesn't even flinch, coldly confirming that being expendable pawns is all the wingless are good for, a brutal truth that pushes Ashe A. Elmheim right to the breaking point. The lore goes like this. The Elmheims are the continent's greatest martial house, sworn to protect the royal family, with Duke Roderick Elmheim ruling at the absolute peak as the undisputed head of the clan, the very same man a memory shows rescuing our hero from freezing to death as a helpless baby. To repay that massive life debt, our guy spends years as the Duke's loyal attack dog, violently cutting down anyone who stands in the family's way. A bitter memory flashes of a young Ashe bleeding in the dirt, humiliated by his own brothers, who mock him for being completely powerless, their cruel smiles rubbing in the fact that he has absolutely no magical talent to offer his savior. In this world, those wing crests are everything, literal marks of magical power etched into a warrior's back. And Ashe is the only member of the prestigious Duke's house born without a single drop of mana. So instead of giving up, the wingless teen just grinds harder, pushing his physical limits in relentless solo training sessions with the hope that sheer devotion will be enough. In a freezing snowy forest, Ashe and his squad navigate the treacherous terrain, until his sharp instincts catch movement through the trees, and they suddenly find themselves completely surrounded by an unknown strike force in white uniforms. Bleeding and desperate, Ashe demands to know why his own father led them into a death trap, only for Duke Roderick to coldly look down at him and drop the ultimate bombshell. Ashe was never a son, just a disposable tool whose purpose is finally served. The devastating reality of that betrayal shatters the young warrior, and with nothing but pure fury keeping him standing, our hero launches himself through the air, lunging forward with a desperate sword slash against the man who raised him, screaming that he trusted the man with his life. Our boy curses his own gullibility as their blades clash in a shower of sparks, but the Duke is completely unfazed, flashing a sinister smile over a tiny scratch on his collar. Before Ashe can follow up, glowing magical chains suddenly snap around his limbs, leaving him wide open as two of his adoptive brothers dive from above. Refusing to go down quietly, he rips his sword upward in a desperate counter to slash the blonde brother. But the magical bindings instantly tighten around his throat, forcing a violent cough of blood from his lungs. The brutal backlash sends him crashing backward through the snow, leaving his smug sibling to mock him one last time for being nothing but a wingless failure. The blonde brother stands victorious over our boy's broken body, sneering that crawling in the snow suits him perfectly. Bleeding into the frost, Ashe chokes out a desperate question, asking why they even bothered taking him in if he was just disposable trash. But Duke Roderick finally steps forward to coldly shatter that illusion, violently grabbing the teen by the hair and yanking his head back to force eye contact. Staring down with glowing red eyes, he admits he never cared about his adopted son, only keeping him around to harvest a dormant power called the Seven Wings from his flesh. Ashe barely has time to process the strange name, before the Duke twists the knife even deeper, remarking that the boy's mother was quite useful for the same reason. The older man turns his back and coldly adds that she was nothing more than a vessel to birth the seed he needed. Our hero reaches out a bloody, trembling hand to beg for an explanation, but the red-eyed Duke just swings a massive glowing sword down at him, leaving the teen cornered in the snow as he screams for Roderick to answer him. His pale, scarred hand finally collapses as the freezing cold seeps into his bones. Covered in frost and his own blood, Ashe stares up at the sky, wondering if this is really how he dies, and what the point of his miserable life even was, while the howling wind sweeps over the desolate battlefield to bury his final moments in the snow. Our hero opens his eyes to a field of pure white, wondering for a second if he's crossed over into the afterlife, until a violent sneeze shakes his tiny frame as he rests on top of a motionless figure in the snow, making the realization hit that he is very much alive. He stares out into the howling blizzard, completely disoriented, before catching sight of a tiny foot wrapped in blue cloth alongside a chubby hand reaching up into the frost. Absolute shock sets in as our boy confirms he hasn't just survived. He's been shoved all the way back into an infant's body, while the pale woman clutching him to her chest is already dead. Suddenly, his golden eyes flare as a shouted command rings out, revealing a search party tearing through the storm on horseback. The dark-haired leader barks at his men to find the woman no matter what, desperate to recover the stolen infant for Duke Roderick, leaving our guy completely stunned by the revelation. The very mention of Duke Roderick sends a chill down his spine, and the realization hits him like a truck. He is the stolen infant they're hunting for, His golden eyes go wide as the impossible truth sets in, realizing he has somehow regressed all the way back to the exact blizzard night he was first found. With the search party closing in, he shelves the existential crisis for later, knowing that if he stays by his mother's lifeless body, he'll end up right back in the monster's clutches. Desperate to change his fate, he channels a glowing power into his tiny hand and ignites a blazing golden aura, crawling away as fast as his infant body can carry him. The heat from his palms melts the ice straight down to the dirt, but the effort leaves him gasping for air in the freezing wind. His tiny limbs burn with a feverish pain as he drags himself forward, and every inch pushes his infant body closer to the breaking point. Yet our boy refuses to just lay down and die, reaching out into the snow and swearing he'll survive just to make Roderick pay. He carves a long trail of melted snow across the wasteland, before his stamina finally gives out, and he collapses right at the boots of a stranger. A young white-haired girl suddenly calls out to her father, and Viscount Highfried rushes over in absolute shock, scooping the freezing infant out of the snow just in time. He stares down at our boy's tiny bruised face, completely stunned that a helpless baby managed to survive the wasteland. The Viscount looks back at the impossibly long trail melted through the frost, wondering just who this mysterious child could possibly be, while the exhausted infant finally sleeps in peace. Our boy drifts through a hazy, glowing void, wondering if he's finally crossed over, convinced the tiny, reddish-haired baby reaching out to him is an angel coming to guide his soul. But instead of the afterlife, he jolts awake in a brand-new infant body, instantly swarmed by a mob of curious kids. A long, white-haired girl and a few toddlers try to scoop him up, but the baby refuses to be restrained, forcefully breaking out of her grasp to hit the floor and scramble away on all fours, leaving an orange-haired girl staring after him in absolute shock. She immediately gives chase down the grand corridor. But before she can catch him, his golden eyes flare up, and a massive pillar of dormant magic blasts our hero high into the sky above the estate. The wild surge of magic sends him tumbling through the night sky. With no way to steer the blast, he plummets straight back down toward the snowy roof and squeezes his eyes shut to brace for a brutal landing. But instead of hitting the tiles, he's plucked right out of the air by a well-dressed nobleman. When our boy opens his eyes, the shock hits him like a truck. The man holding him is Viscount Highfried, Duke Roderick's older brother, which means this massive snow-dusted estate has to be the Branch family's mansion. He knows the Viscount is the head of this house, a legendary warrior who once stood alongside Roderick as one of the kingdom's twin wings. But he also knows this man and his entire family are fated to be wiped out in an upcoming civil war. Taking it all in, Ash finally accepts that he really has regressed to his infancy, and he facepalms at the realization that he escaped the Duke only to drop straight into his brother's lap. The orange-haired woman cradles our boy in the drawing room, marveling at the sheer scale of his magical outburst, and looks down at him with warm, genuine affection. She gently kisses his forehead to soothe away the scare of his little flight, leaving Ash completely taken aback by the tender treatment, while Highfried just stands over them with a knowing smirk. The silver-haired man steps forward to declare that this child harbors immense power, pulling back the baby's clothes to reveal a red crest stamped right onto his side. The woman gasps in the mirror's reflection as she instantly recognizes the legendary mark of the 7 wings, and our hero stares down at the mark in utter disbelief, his golden eyes widening as the horrific truth finally clicks. A dark memory flashed before him, showing Duke Roderick grabbing his head in the snow and admitting he only wanted the power dwelling inside him. Watching the older man carry his unconscious past self through the blizzard, Ash realized he had never been a son, he was just livestock waiting to be harvested. The sheer audacity of that bastard calling him wingless after ripping them out himself sends our boy into a blinding rage. But as the orange-haired woman cradles his trembling little body, the Viscount steps out of the shadows to ask what they should do with the child. Ash sweats bullets as the imposing man leans in, clenching his tiny fists while he vows to keep his true strength hidden until he can use it to exact his revenge. But instead of handing him over to the Duke, Highfried makes a bold declaration he is taking the boy in as his own adopted son. He gently pats the baby's head, noting that the poor thing is just a fledgling who can't even fly yet, and promises to personally raise and protect him until the day he is ready to take flight on his own. The tender moment is suddenly interrupted when a pile of kids tumbles through the doorway, caught red-handed trying to eavesdrop on their parents. The long, white-haired girl dusts herself off and sheepishly admits they were just worried about the little guy, and the short, orange-haired girl trots over to the woman's chair, peering down at the wide-eyed baby to ask what they should call him. The orange-haired woman smiles warmly and takes a second to think it over, then lifts our boy up to the moonlight to officially name him Aster, a brand new star born into their family. 10 years later, a carriage pulls up to a sprawling white estate for the sword dance gathering. Attendants bow low to welcome Viscount Highfried, while the carriage door swings open in the background. A now teenage Aster steps out into the daylight and turns back to offer a gentlemanly hand to his adoptive sister Alphen. She flashes him a warm smile as she accepts his help before the two of them fall into step behind their father and head across the grand courtyard to join the event. The Sword Dance Gathering is supposed to be a friendly annual event where noble warrior houses mingle, but it's really just a massive flex for the families to show off their young swordsmen, and the second the Viscount's trio steps into the courtyard, all eyes lock onto them. The crowd immediately starts whispering, as onlookers mock the family for showing up and trash the Viscount for adopting a nobody with zero background. The sheer disdain of the Elmheim elites hangs over them like a dark cloud as every snobby noble in the yard stares daggers at our boy. Alphen tells him not to let the trash talk get to him, warning him that anyone who shows weakness here gets crushed, even as her own hand visibly trembles on her sword hilt. Ash catches the nervous tell, but Viscount Highfried gently interrupts, gesturing toward the towering iron gates of the estate to ask if his adopted son is disappointed by the icy welcome. Ash just flashes a razor-sharp smile, declaring that a cold reception suits him perfectly, drawing a relieved chuckle from his father. A bitter memory flashed before him, showing his past self kneeling in the dirt as the crowd laughed at the family's wingless disgrace. Now, however, the power of the 7 wings is already his, and his golden eye flares with pure confidence. The trio finally steps up to the entrance, ready to make their social debut, while a pair of elites watch their every move from a lit window above. Unbothered by the stares, our boy just smirks through the shadows, leading his new family right up to the front steps, absolutely ready to crash this high society gathering and show them exactly what a wingless kid can do. In this world, knights sit at the very peak of society, expected to possess both overwhelming power and dazzling splendor, proving their might as 2 fighters clash hard enough to send a shockwave through the arena, and earning their glory as the younger teen overpowers his rival and knocks him backward. The brutal duel is already in full swing, and the older challenger aggressively closes the distance to strike again. But what truly separates the elites from the trash is the ultimate family symbol, the wing crest, which flares to life as the young defender unleashes a glowing blue slash that shatters the man's blade into pieces, leaving the victor to raise his sword and claim total dominance. Up on the balcony, Alphen covers her ears to block out the ruthless atmosphere, and it's no wonder the younger girls stubbornly refuse to even show up today. For our boy Ash, however, the violence triggers something much darker as a grim memory flashes before him, revealing his past life where he kneels defeated on the ground while his adoptive brother laughs at his broken body. Alphen calls out his name, and our guy smoothly pivots, asking if she's sweating her first big gathering. He just smirks, admitting that for him this whole event actually feels incredibly nostalgic, at least until Highfried steps in to announce he's off to a conference, leaving the teen in charge of watching over his sister. Alphen immediately protests since she's technically a whole year older, which Ash brushes off by teasing her for being too clumsy to fly solo before heading out. The Viscount gives him a solid fatherly pat on the shoulder, encouraging him to mingle and make some connections, though his tone drops to a dead serious whisper as he warns the kid not to let a single soul catch on about his 7 wings. Ash watches the older man walk away, already feeling the suffocating weight of the room pressing in. The entire hall twists into a sea of shadowy elites, their glowing red eyes locked dead onto the wingless adopted kid. Our guy quickly realizes that with an atmosphere this openly hostile, networking is basically a lost cause, so he turns on his heel, leaving Alphen to call out from the balcony to ask where he's heading. Without even glancing back, the teen casually announces he's off to make some friends, locking his sights on a pack of arrogant main house elites lounging on a nearby sofa. The red-haired leader spots the approach, swirling his drink as he demands to know who this nobody is. Ash just flashes a polite smile, stepping right up to introduce himself to brother Darius. He proudly drops his full name, Aster F. Elmheim, and cheerfully declares himself the man's new younger brother, adding that he saw him from outside and just had to come say hello. The tension hangs until one of the cronies chimes in, recognizing our hero as the adopted stray the Viscount picked up, which makes Darius's eyes flare with manic disgust as he scoffs at the absolute nerve of this trash claiming the Elmheim name. Staring at Darius and Grion, our boy remembers the ruthless monsters who butchered him in his previous life, and how terrifying their cruelty used to feel, but standing in front of them now, they just look like a bunch of edgy kids playing pretend. The stare-down breaks when a voice calls his name, and Alphen grabs his arm, urgently trying to drag him out of the room before things get ugly. But it's too late. One of the elites spots her, and Darius leans back on the couch to loudly mock the girl for not hiding behind her daddy today. He orders her to come over and entertain them under a direct command from the main house. Alphen glares right back and flat out refuses, declaring there's no master-servant rule between their families. She turns to storm off, but Ash suddenly grabs her arm and tells her to wait, as Darius coldly interrupts, snapping that he isn't done talking. Our boy's face goes dead serious, but Darius just twists his into a psychotic grin, loudly mocking Viscount Highfried for failing to protect the king back in the day, reminding the whole room that the man's own brother chopped off his arm as punishment. The cronies eat it up, laughing at the disgraced knight and insulting Alphen's bloodline, which sends Alphen over the edge, screaming at the noble to take it back. but Darius just takes a sip of his wine and spits it directly into her face. The sudden shock sends Alphen spiraling into a childhood memory where harsh voices tell her she's just a useless girl who can never inherit the title, as cruel elites smile down at her, leaving her to stand humiliated in a wine-stained dress while they laugh at her misery. But this time, Ash steps up right behind her, calmly admitting he was worried on the way here, wondering if he might not feel any anger at all seeing their faces again, before he moves in a sudden blur to snatch the wine bottle right out of a crony's hand. Standing protectively in front of his sister, he tells them he's actually glad, tossing the heavy glass high into the air with a casual shout of Darius's name. The red-haired noble barely has a second to look up. Ash draws his blade with lightning speed and slices the falling bottle clean in half, calling them the exact same pieces of trash they've always been. The severed glass instantly tips forward, dumping its entire payload directly onto Darius's face. The rest of the elites panic as Darius chokes on the liquid, while our hero just stands there with his sword drawn and perfectly calm. He casually wipes a stray drop from his lip, noting that the vintage is just grape juice, and smirks down at his past-life murderers, mocking that it's the perfect drink for little baby nobles. 3 years ago, the Viscount screamed at Aster to control his power and demanded to know if he was trying to kill his sisters. His dormant power violently erupted, nearly crushing his sisters, leaving the girls cowering in absolute terror as chaotic energy tore through their home, unleashing the true untamed destruction of the Seven Wings. The vision of that monstrous force still haunts our boy, as the Viscount questions if he himself can even control it, and wonders if the two of them can both manage such a dangerous power. Meanwhile, in another part of the estate, a frantic servant bursts into a conference room, prompting Viscount Highfried to snap at the sudden intrusion. The servant stammers out the horrifying news that the sons of the Elmheim main and branch families are throwing down in a duel, leaving the gathered nobles completely stunned by the sheer audacity of it all. Highfried immediately grabs his sword with his heart dropping into his stomach, just as Alphen comes sprinting down the hall in an absolute panic, begging her father to tell her what's happening. Out on the spectator balconies, the rest of the elites are already crowding the rails to catch the spectacle, staring down at the arena and buzzing with excitement over a rare clash between the great Elmheim brothers. But as Highfried finally reaches the edge, his face is grim with the realization of the massive political fallout this duel could trigger. While some of the surrounding nobles sweat nervously at the stakes, others just lean back with amused grins, and a bearded observer strokes his chin, predicting that this year's sword dance gathering is about to get incredibly ugly. Down on the arena floor, Darius raises his blade as a glowing red crest flares across his hand, soaking up the crowd's jeers about his opponent being a stray-born mutt, while the surrounding elites gasp in awe at the sight of his high-level 4-wing mark. The Duke's son just smirks and demands to see his opponent's wing crest, daring his cousin to reveal his own power unless he's too embarrassed. But Aster calmly agrees that flaunting a mere pattern like a trophy is actually pretty humiliating. Our boy flashes a confident smile and admits he could never do something so tacky, which sends a violent twitch straight through Darius's eye. The red-haired noble snarls that when he wins, the stray will be forced to apologize to his sister, but our hero coldly counters that if he takes the victory, Darius will become his personal dog. Pushed over the edge, Darius leaps forward with a furious roar, vowing to work his new pet to the bone. He brings his heavy blade down in a massive overhead strike, but Aster effortlessly blocks the hit, even as the sheer force of the blow sends our boy skidding backward across the stone floor. His hand trembles slightly from the immense physical strain of parrying the brute force attack, giving Darius the perfect opening to wind up for another swing and boast that this is the true power of a chosen bloodline. The red-haired noble unleashes a massive sweeping slash, but our hero holds his ground to absorb the shockwave. Up on the balcony, Alphen cries out her brother's name in terror, but a bearded observer just chuckles to himself, noting that Darius's actual swordsmanship is incredibly sloppy, and explains that the overwhelming magic of a wing crest easily makes up for any lack of raw skill. The observer points out that if a single wing holds the magical power of a flickering candle, only for Darius to finish the thought, screaming that the magic of his 4 wings is a raging explosion, as the redhead swings wildly with a crazed smile to demand where all of Aster's bravado went. But our boy just sighs and asks if those threats were all empty talk, letting his own blade glow a bright yellow, which pushes Darius over the edge, and he charges forward with dual pink energy swords to demand Aster's true power. Watching from the sidelines, a blonde nobleman confidently declares that the match is already decided, just as the two fighters violently clash in the dead center of the hall, setting off a blinding explosion of pink and yellow energy. But when the smoke clears, Darius's eyes widen in absolute shock. Aster glares right back with glowing golden eyes, coldly telling his former abuser that he talks way too much, and with a single devastating sweep, he shatters Darius's guard and launches him backward through the air. Our hero stands tall as his blade radiates a fierce aura, then launches himself right back into the air, letting the guy know he spent 10 grueling years grinding his magic with the Viscount just for this exact chance to crush his former abusers. He channels every ounce of his burning rage into one massive strike. When the heavy blow connects, Darius lets out a strained gasp as he desperately tries to hold his ground, but the crushing pressure forces the red-haired noble straight to his knees and cracks the stone floor beneath his boots. From the sidelines, the blonde-haired brother stares in absolute horror, unable to comprehend how the Duke's son is being completely overpowered. Darius grits his teeth and screams that he has 4 wings as he desperately tries to hold back the flaming blade. But our boy just stares down at him with a terrifying, icy calm. A sickening crack echoes through the courtyard when Aster shatters the noble's weapon under the sheer pressure, leaving the blindfolded spectators up on the balcony murmuring in disbelief as they watch Darius get completely dominated. The dark-haired fighter doesn't let up for a single second, and his golden energy flares brighter with every relentless swing, a brutal display that forces Highfried to grip his cane, realizing the duel has escalated way past a simple scuffle. Down in the dirt, Darius sweats profusely as his defense crumbles to pieces, and the golden light threatens to swallow him whole. In his previous life, his brother Grion laughed maniacally as he brutally severed Aster's arm, reveling in the unhinged joy of mutilating his own family. But that was the exact moment our hero's ominous, world-ending power first awakened in the dark, and Grion could only stare in sheer terror as the massive golden energy completely overwhelmed him. Our boy draws back his blade, completely engulfed in a massive sphere of explosive yellow magic as Alphen screams from the balcony for him to stop, and with a deafening roar, he hurls the weapon forward with earth-shattering force. The sheer momentum sends him sliding backward across the stone as the heavy steel buries itself deep into the ground, stopping mere inches from Darius, as our boy coldly suggests his cousin wear rags next time, so he won't mind getting wet. Aster just stares down at the pathetic sight, the lethal glow in his eyes slowly fading back to normal. He looks up at the balcony, declaring that he isn't the helpless, wingless Ash anymore. Seeing Alphen perfectly safe with Viscount Highfried watching over her is enough to finally clear his head for now, so he turns his back on his trembling cousin and flashes a confident, gentle smile. But suddenly a suffocating pressure fills the hall, forcing his eye to flare yellow once more, and he whips around in shock as a towering figure radiating a terrifying red aura appears at the top of the grand staircase. Our boy gasps in realization as that sickeningly familiar energy washes over him, and he stares up at the man who slaughtered him in his past life, as Duke Roderick glares down at the trembling crowd. But as a terrified voice in the hall screams the monster's name, Aster realizes his ultimate nightmare has just walked into the room. The crowd is still reeling from the shock of a mere Viscount's son absolutely washing the main house's third-born, but their whispers quickly turn to dread as they realize Darius won't take this kind of humiliation lying down. Heavy boots echo across the cracked stone, and our boy tightens his grip on his hilt, while his defeated opponent flashes a deranged, bloody smile from the floor. Aster turns to face the towering newcomer, staring up at the cold, imposing visage of the main house's leader, the infamous Duke Roderick Elmheim, as Darius immediately scrambles to his father's leg, clinging to the fur cape like a pathetic child to point the finger. He screams for the Duke to punish the filthy mutt who dared defy the main house, begging his father to unleash his overwhelming power and put Aster in his place. But instead of targeting our hero, Roderick violently smashes his heavy cane straight down onto Darius's hand. The red-haired teen gasps in agony as his bones crack against the stone, and the onlookers shriek in terror as the Duke draws his blade and glares down at his own son with utter disgust. A desperate nobleman screams for him to stop, but Roderick mercilessly swings his sword down, declaring that a loser who can't even avenge himself has no right to hold a weapon. The sheer force of the Duke's aura suffocates the grand hall, leaving Darius trembling in a pool of his own blood. And without missing a beat, Roderick turns his weapon on Aster to demand what he thinks he's doing. But our boy doesn't even flinch, reminding the Duke that his cousin still hasn't apologized to his sister. He calmly looks the monster dead in the eye and asks him to save the punishment until after that happens, prompting Roderick's aura to flare purple as he mocks the kid, asking if this little orphan picked up by Highfried actually thinks he's part of the Elmheims. Aster stands tall, proudly declaring that even without blood ties, his father taught him the true pride of a knight, and the tyrant falls dead silent while the rest of the elites watch from the balconies in stunned disbelief. Then the Duke's voice booms over the hall, bringing with it a looming vision of the main house's untouchable power, a threat so heavy that the onlookers mutter this has escalated way past a simple children's quarrel. Roderick leans in close, revealing that Viscount Highfried once offered up his own arm as the price for disloyalty, and as the tyrant's blade draws a bead of blood from our hero's neck, he demands to know what the boy is willing to sacrifice. Aster just takes a slow breath and firmly states that this wasn't some petty squabble, but a legitimate duel to defend his family's honor. The Duke's eyes flare with murderous intent, but my guy throws the monster's own philosophy right back in his face, roaring that he won't give up a single finger, because a true knight must avenge himself. Up on the balcony, Alphen grips the railing in sheer terror, while a blue-haired nobleman gawks at the absurdity of a 10-year-old acting so tough. But Roderick isn't laughing. With a cold glare, the Duke simply mutters that he understands and dares the kid to draw his own sword. Aster's eyes widen as his hand flies to his hilt, but the overwhelming pressure leaves our hero completely frozen. Suddenly, a massive beam of explosive energy shatters the arena floor, and Alphen covers her mouth in shock as a furious voice echoes through the hall, screaming Roderick's name. Viscount Highfried leaps from the upper balcony to bring a glowing blade straight down at his brother, but the Duke blocks the strike, sending a shockwave rippling across the room as the two titans trade blows in a blinding flash of power. As the dust kicks up, the Viscount frantically calls out for his son. But as the debris slowly begins to settle, Roderick's eyes widen in genuine shock because our hero is still on his feet, battered and bleeding but holding his ground, his glowing golden eye piercing through the haze with unyielding resolve. The Duke finally lowers his weapon, surveying the massive crater his brother just carved into the stone to protect the teen, and with the immediate threat gone, the adrenaline leaves Aster's system and he collapses backward. Viscount Highfried catches him instantly, his face pale with worry, but our boy just looks up with a bloody smile, whispering that he kept his promise to protect their family. Tears prick the Viscount's eyes as he tells his son that he was absolutely magnificent. Later, as the elites disperse up the grand staircase, a bearded observer teases Roderick for acting so childishly against a mere kid. And while a red-haired nobleman tries to defend the Duke's heavy-handed compromise, they can't help but acknowledge the birth of a rising star, who boldly defied the great Duke and survived. A blonde observer agrees it was the perfect social debut, even if it nearly split the Elmheim family in two, but Roderick just stares ahead with glowing red eyes, declaring that an age of upheaval is coming, a storm destined to tear the world apart. Meanwhile, across the hall, Aster leans on his father's shoulder and smiles warmly as Alphen rushes to his side, finally safe from the shadows of his past. But peace is a fleeting luxury for a boy preparing for war, and the sharp clack of wooden swords soon rings through the Highfried courtyard, where our hero strikes with ruthless precision, sending his sparring partner crashing back into the dirt. The defeated teen can only smile from the ground, praising the sheer magnificence of the blow, calling Aster a true master without a hint of bitterness. Watching from the sidelines, the estate guards are absolutely terrified by the 10-year-old's relentless drive since returning from the sword dance gathering, whispering about the rumors of how this very kid brutally beat down Duke Roderick's third son. For the Branch family guards who have swallowed the main house's insults for years, it's the most refreshing gossip they've ever heard. But as our boy readies his stance, he reflects that he showed enough power and presence at the gathering, swinging his wooden blade at a fresh opponent in the hopes that his recent victory will at least silence the haters, calling the Viscount house a disgrace. But as his strike slams into the other teen's block, he reminds himself that his real target is still the Elmheims, pressing the attack against the struggling guard, while wishing the gathering had actually pushed him to his absolute limits. But the bitter truth of his past defeat still haunts him. As he is now, he still doesn't have the juice to beat Duke Roderick. Moving to an open field, he swings his wooden blade hard enough to whip up a localized gale, reflecting that the world's precious wing crests are ultimately just indicators of raw magic capacity. He knows that all that innate power is completely wasted if the wielder can't actually control it, and yearns for a way to unleash the terrifying explosive golden aura of his 7 wings without the constant fear of losing his mind. The sheer force of his practice swing unleashes a massive shockwave that literally blows a bystander off their feet, and his glowing yellow eyes narrow with intense focus. Soon, the dirt is littered with bruised, unconscious men as our hero aggressively demands another challenger until a familiar voice calls out from behind, teasing him for going all out yet again. Alphen approaches the wreckage, noting that he clearly doesn't understand the concept of restraint before delivering a message that their father is calling for him. Snapping out of his battle trance, Aster immediately agrees to go, but as he turns, he finally takes a good look at his sister's attire. She pauses, tilting her head at his sudden stare, and our boy points out she's actually wearing a training uniform, something she used to swear off because it wasn't cute enough. Alphen just smiles softly, admitting that watching him fight made her realize she needs to step up her own game, before suddenly leveling the tip of her wooden sword right at his chest and demanding with a confident smirk that he spar with her the second he gets back. Aster happily accepts the challenge with a warm smile. Meanwhile, in a completely different courtyard, a fierce red-haired woman is busy wiping the floor with a squad of grown men, forcing the last guy standing to beg for mercy. Our boy knocks on the heavy, ornate door of the Viscount's study, stepping inside to formally greet his adoptive father. Highfried looks unusually serious as he instructs the teen to take a seat, and Aster settles into the ornate chair, waiting to hear why he was pulled away from his training. The older man begins by reflecting on the 10 years that have passed since they welcomed the boy into their family, before reaching across the desk to place a small blue velvet cushion between them, admitting he had planned to wait until Aster was older. Resting on the fabric is a massive glowing red gem ring, prompting Aster to ask what it is, but Highfried just looks him dead in the eye and declares it to be the proof of the next head of the house. He formally asks our hero to inherit the Viscount title, leaving the teen in stunned silence while the nobleman explains that their branch family is in a highly delicate position following the events of the gathering, and as lords governing a vast territory, they have a duty to protect their people and uphold the Elmheim name. The weight of their lineage looms behind the Viscount as glowing silhouettes, driving home his point that they cannot leave the successor position vacant forever. But our boy immediately spots the political landmines, asking if his adoptive sisters will actually accept this sudden promotion, and Highfried calmly reveals that the girls are returning from night school in 3 days for the official announcement. Aster names the silver-haired Marfa and the fiery red-haired Kudo, already dreading the absolute nightmare of their reaction. Our hero points out the obvious, warning that Sister Kudo is going to be absolutely furious, but Highfried sighs, claiming the fiery girl already despises him simply for being born male and blessed with 7 wings. Clenching his fist, Aster flatly refuses the inheritance, confessing from the shadow of his own guilt that he can't even control his magic, and once nearly killed his own sister, insisting that an immature fool like him has no right to lead, let alone the confidence to win over an angry sibling. Highfried just smiles, noting that this profound self-awareness often makes him wonder if the boy is truly just a child. Reaching for a long wooden box on his desk, the Viscount admits the ring was supposed to be a reward for the sword dance gathering, but seeing his son's hesitation, he slides the heavy case forward, suggesting this alternative might make him happier. Aster's golden eyes widen in shock, asking what it is as he senses the immense power radiating from within. Highfried flips the lid open to reveal the legendary magic sword Graham, the magic devouring sword, the one weapon in existence actually capable of keeping the catastrophic power of his 7 wings in check. To test out the new hardware, Highfried brings our boy out to a secluded spot in the sunlit forest, where Aster immediately asks why they couldn't just use the estate's training hall. His father dryly reminds him of the massive crater he accidentally blew in the wall last time. Getting down to business, Highfried presents the magic sword Graham, a relic passed down only to the eldest Elmheim sons, and as the Viscount grips the hilt, Aster's eyes widen in shock because the legendary weapon doesn't actually have a physical blade. But the moment his father channels magic into the grip, a massive red energy blade erupts from the crossguard, which the older man explains scales entirely with its wielder's raw potential, and to prove it, he unleashes a devastating wave with a single swing that carves a massive trench straight through the trees. However, he warns that if a weak mage tries to wield it, the cursed relic will drain them dry. Holding out the hilt, Highfried asks if our boy is ready to test his limits. Aster doesn't hesitate to wrap his fingers around the grip, and instantly, a massive torrent of golden and black magic flares to life, as the young man realizes the relic is actively pulling the energy straight out of his core. The sheer force of it blasts a blinding red beam high into the sky above the forest. Miles away, 2 knights panic over what looks like a comet launching into orbit, and when the first knight asks what his partner means by something flying up, Kudo steps up behind them, taking one look at the ridiculous display of power and immediately knowing it has to be Aster. Our hero manages to stabilize the fiery hilt, prompting Highfried to note that it is quite the sword. The Viscount admits that what's truly extraordinary here isn't the sword itself, it's the terrifying scale of Aster's raw power. He reveals that not a single person in the entire history of the Elmheim family has ever possessed a 7-wing crest. Years ago, Highfried tells the boy that mastering this energy can push him past even 6-winged monsters like Duke Roderick, and as our hero realizes he could actually surpass him, the Viscount makes it clear that power this massive only breeds conflict. If the rest of the world ever catches wind of his 7-wing crest, greedy elites will crawl out of the woodwork to use him as a pawn, or send assassins in the dark to eliminate the threat entirely, to make sure he never has to regret being helpless when that day finally arrives. The older man urges him to start building his strength right now. Gripping his father's hand tight, Aster silently swears he will never go back to the miserable, broken life of his past. He thanks the Viscount out loud, absolutely determined to tame his 7 wings, no matter what it takes. 3 days later, the Highfried family gathers in the Grand Hall to welcome back their eldest daughters. Sister Kudo proudly announces her return from the Night Academy, clearing her throat with a dramatic cough before throwing her arms wide to demand a massive welcome home hug from her little sisters. But Fren and Freya completely ignore the open invitation, sprinting right past her to tackle Marfa instead, left standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. Kudo whines about being left out, only for the girls to bluntly explain that she always ruins their hair. Kudo immediately gets defensive, swearing up and down that she's a master of knightly etiquette and would never do something so improper. But the second she spots Alfin across the room, all that supposed elegance goes right out the window as she launches into a full-force tackle hug. Alphen desperately protests the aggressive affection, while Kudo happily scrubs her head, prompting Marfa to scan the chaotic room and ask where Aster is. Highfried awkwardly tries to dodge the question, but his hesitation instantly catches Kudo's attention, and all her playful energy vanishes in a flash, replaced by a dead serious glare. Out in the forest, a massive pillar of red magic erupts through the canopy, and our boy struggles to keep a grip on Graham while it violently flares out of control. Sweating and gritting his teeth, he curses his total lack of progress. He can easily manifest the blade, but choking back the overwhelming energy takes everything he has. He wonders how his father makes it look so effortless, until Kudo strolls into the clearing, teasing him for going so hard. Aster lowers his weapon, surprised she came looking for him instead of waiting for a proper greeting. Kudo playfully calls him cold and asks if our hero thinks he's too special to care about his sisters now. Aster quickly changes the subject by praising her for crushing her trainee missions, noting she was the only knight to earn the honor medal this year. Kudo confidently fires back that if she couldn't pull off at least that much, she'd never be fit to inherit their father's position. She glares right at him to ask if he turned down the heir position just to spare her feelings, forcing Aster to nervously clarify that he simply doesn't feel qualified for the job yet. Frustrated, Kudo turns away, muttering under her breath about both him and their father, and hefts her broadsword, completely fed up that they know her dream but still treat her so cruelly. Before he can respond, our boy senses a sudden spike in killing intent, and a glowing blue blade violently slices straight through a tree trunk. His sister follows through with the strike, sending a destructive wave of energy tearing through the dirt right at him. Aster leaps backward into the air just as the ground erupts where he was standing, and touches down in the tall grass, demanding to know what she thinks she's doing. Kudo just rests her massive sword on her shoulder, declaring it's finally time to test her little brother's skills. She flashes a dangerous smile and warns him that the warm-up is over. Our boy immediately panics, yelling out that his control over Graham is still completely busted, but his sister coldly asks if he'd whine like that to an enemy on the battlefield. Aster stammers at the very thought of a real threat, and Kudo drops into a low stance, to promise she will crush him if he dares to hold back. She instantly dashes forward at blinding speed, kicking up a massive cloud of dust as she closes the gap. Kudo leaps into the air to deliver a devastating blue magic strike, and Aster realizes he is completely outmatched in his current state. Left with zero options, his eyes flare a glowing yellow as he desperately unleashes his unstable red magic, and the siblings clash in a violent explosion of red and blue energy, leaving our hero absolutely terrified that his own sister is actually trying to murder him. The forest quakes as their energies violently collide, and Kudo grins through the blast, boasting that her swordsmanship has only grown sharper since attending night school. Our boy struggles to hold his ground as his red aura flickers under the weight of her strike, but she just mocks his lack of control and sends him flying backward through the trees. He lands hard, his boots tearing up the dirt, and pants as he realizes his sister truly isn't holding back a single ounce of her strength. Back then, she never pulled her punches either. During their early training, Kudo bore the heavy burden of being the only son with inheritance rights, while our hero was treated as the special one, blessed with a wing crest far superior to anyone else's. To her, that gap was entirely unfair, turning her into a storm of a sister who picked fights at every opportunity. A massive shockwave rips through the forest clearing, as our boy grits his teeth against her relentless assault, and he unleashes a desperate slash just to push her back. But Kudo easily weathers the blast and angrily declares him completely unfit to lead the house. Miles away at the estate, Marfa watches the distant flashes of light from the window, warning her father that this little sibling rivalry could easily end with a corpse. Viscount Highfried remains calm, confident that his kids won't cross that final line. But his daughter isn't so sure, and she turns from the glass to ask the real reason they were suddenly summoned back from night school. The old man's expression darkens as he reaches into his desk drawer, and Marfa gasps when he pulls out a wax-sealed envelope. He reveals it's a formal summons from the Elmheim main house, explaining that the shadowy elders running the core of the family have suddenly demanded to see their grandchildren's faces. Marfa realizes just how dangerous this political game has become. A thick tension settles over the office, and the silence stretches on, the weight of the main house's gaze looming over them. But out in the forest, politics are the absolute last thing on our boy's mind. Right now, he's entirely focused on surviving Kudo's crushing downward strike, where every blow feels like trying to parry a giant troll swinging a massive hammer. Realizing he can't match her raw strength, Aster shifts his grip and smoothly deflects the glowing blue blade to the side, sending her stumbling forward. He tries to use the brief opening to talk and begs her to just listen. But Kudo spins right back around, her eyes flaring with fury as she accuses him of trying to run away. She unleashes a devastating point-blank shockwave, and Aster is blown violently backward, tasting blood as he skids across the dirt. Kudo just hefts her massive sword onto her shoulder and starts in on a harsh lecture. She tells him that relying solely on a blade makes a fighter third-rate, and leaning purely on magic makes them second-rate, because true masters command both. She stares down at her battered brother and calls him a complete disappointment, reminding him that just one extra wing crest is supposed to triple a mage's raw capacity. Kudo points out that with her 5 wings against his 7, she should be vastly outmatched in firepower and stamina, yet our boy refuses to face her in a straight contest of strength, always choosing to run. She taunts him, asking if he really trusts his own power that little, or if he's just afraid of losing control again, and Aster freezes, wondering if he really is afraid of his own 7 wings. He stares down at the bladeless hilt of Graham as the math finally starts mathing. The reason the magic sword feels so unstable isn't because he lacks power, but because he's been subconsciously forcing his magic down. Kudo glares down at him, her resentment finally boiling over as she spits that he has everything she ever wanted. She tightens her grip on her glowing blue weapon, furious that he's wasting his immense fortune while remaining completely oblivious to it. Screaming for him to hand it all over, she lunges forward for a finishing blow, but our boy finally stops nerfing himself and braces his hilt, meeting her head-on as a towering explosion of blue and red energy erupts into the sky. Kudo's eyes widen in shock as her full-force strike is completely repelled, and when the smoke clears, our hero stands tall with glowing yellow eyes, thanking his sister for finally waking him up. He charges straight at her through the smoke without even forming a blade, and Kudo scoffs, assuming he's already run out of mana. But as our boy leaps into the air, he taps into the true nature of his 7 wings, an inexhaustible well of power. And since he can't control a sustained weapon yet, he focuses all of that overwhelming energy into a single explosive burst at the exact moment of impact. Kudo actually smiles, genuinely impressed by his half-baked strategy, before Aster touches down and declares he didn't get this second chance at life just to throw it away. His red crest flares to life on his back, radiating immense heat. His new loving family flashes before him, a stark reminder of the happiness that was completely out of reach in his previous timeline. Kudo pauses, totally confused by his slip about a second life. But Aster ignores her and swings his weapon with everything he has. Mid-strike, however, his eyes widen in shock. The lethal wave of red energy inexplicably dissipates into thin air. Kudo stands there completely unharmed, just as stunned by the dud attack as he is. But our hero refuses to let a little misfire slow him down, so he instantly forces his magic back into the hilt, and with a vow that he is officially done holding back, he unleashes another massive wave of red energy to keep the fight alive. Kudo wakes up with a sharp gasp, squinting at the sunlight streaming into her bedroom as she tries to piece together how she got there. A familiar voice suddenly breaks the quiet, and Sister Marfa turns from the window to casually mention that she's been out cold for quite a while. Panic instantly hits as Kudo scrambles upright, frantically demanding to know what happened to her match against Aster. But the older sister just smiles warmly and explains that our hero carried her all the way back to the estate. According to his cover story, she simply dozed off mid-duel from the sheer exhaustion of her long journey, an excuse that makes Kudo narrow her eyes, knowing full well that is a complete lie. Back then, in the final terrifying second of their clash, she was absolutely certain Aster's glowing blade was going to cut her down. But in reality, our boy forcefully dispelled his magic right before the impact, letting only the harmless residual energy wash over her as he intentionally pulled the lethal blow. Deep down, Kudo knew there was no way her sweet little brother would actually murder his own sister, even if his monstrous, glowing-eyed aura had genuinely convinced her otherwise in that split second. An amused smirk tugs at Kudo's lips as she thinks about her arrogant sibling, her grip tightening around the hilt of her massive sword. Refusing to accept a pity win, she aggressively demands to know where Aster is, so they can have a real rematch. But Marfa casually pops her bubble, revealing that our boy has already left the estate. Kudo freezes, completely blindsided by the news, as Marfa explains the sudden summons from the main house, assuming her sister already knew all about it. Distress washes over the red-haired knight's face, and she screams in frustration, furious that no one bothered to tell her. Meanwhile, a horse-drawn carriage rattles down the cobblestone streets toward the capital. Inside, Aster gazes thoughtfully out the window, leaving his childhood home behind, until Viscount Highfried breaks the silence, warning his son about the elder lords they are about to face. He describes them as the shadow rulers of the Elmheim family, retired elites who still hold terrifying influence over the empire. The Viscount sighs, deeply concerned as to why these powerful figures would suddenly take an interest in his adopted son, but Aster calmly replies that it's obviously payback for the stunt he pulled at the sword dance gathering. Our boy knows the elders value the family's pristine reputation above all else, meaning anyone who stains it faces brutal consequences, so he fully expects to be thrown straight into the beast cages as monster feed for humiliating a main branch noble. Highfried looks at the boy in horror, demanding to know where he heard such a gruesome rumor. But Aster just smiles nervously, brushing it off while admitting he's fully prepared for vigilante justice or permanent exile. Changing the subject, the Viscount asks if his son is truly okay with leaving without saying a proper goodbye to his sisters. The teen just nods, reasoning that he was supposed to leave before they arrived anyway, and figures Kudo will be much happier without him around given how much she dislikes him. Resting his hand near Graham's hilt, he notes that thanks to her brutal lesson, he finally knows how to control his weapon. And with this newfound grip on the Seven Wings' power, Aster looks his father dead in the eye and strictly forbids him from trying to rescue him. He declares that whatever the elders throw at him, he is prepared to survive it on his own. Suddenly, an angry voice echoes through the cabin, mocking Aster's high and mighty attitude, making our boy's golden eyes snap wide open as he turns to see Kudo literally clinging to the outside of the moving carriage. Highfried is just as stunned, asking if she seriously ran all the way here to catch them, but the red-haired menace just swings herself through the window and dramatically complains about being left behind without a word. She glares at her father, fully aware that the old geezers from the main house summoned them, and with a heavy sigh, she resigns herself to the fact that she and Marfa were only called back to guard the estate in their absence, though her playful demeanor drops as she admits how dangerous this summons really is. She echoes Marfa's grim warning about the dark, imposing castle he might never return from. Aster flashes a reassuring smile, telling her she's overthinking it, even though internally he knows his survival is a total coin toss. But Kudo isn't having it, suddenly jabbing a finger right in his face to bluntly declare just how much she dislikes him. She lists off all her grievances, how he gets special treatment for being a male with the 7 wings, how he's naturally stronger than her, and how he constantly acts like a grown-up despite being the youngest sibling, until her voice finally softens, admitting that beneath all the resentment, he's still her precious family. She looks her little brother dead in the eye, reminding him that no matter how mature he acts, he's still just a kid to her, and standing up in the cabin, she demands he come back home in one piece so they can properly finish their match. Flashing a confident smirk, she warns him she won't let him get away with a pity win. And with that, the red-haired knight casually leaps backward out of the speeding carriage, leaving Aster staring out the window in utter bewilderment, while Highfried just chuckles at his daughter's fiery exit. A genuine smile crosses Aster's face as he softly thanks his big sister for the pep talk, swearing he'll definitely come back. Our hero rides toward the capital, ready to face the shadow rulers of his family. Arriving at the imposing iron gates of the main house, Lord Highfried and our boy get a formally cold reception, with armored guards announcing that the elder lords are already waiting inside. When Highfried tries to wave off the escort, the sentries cross their spears to block his path, revealing they are under strict orders to bring both the Viscount and his adopted son in together, which prompts the old man to defensively shield the teen. Aster remains perfectly calm, his glowing yellow eyes taking in the hostility, and as he stares up at the massive castle under a blood-red sky, he feels a dark nostalgia for his former prison. Years ago, when Highfried first brought him to these grounds, the Viscount warned him to keep his cool no matter what the elites said, though the young boy only gave a defiant, non-committal response. Walking through the estate grounds now, the Viscount sighs in exasperation at how the main family operates, muttering that the elders' behavior is exactly the problem. As they pass the courtyard, the chatter of trainees catches our hero's attention, with the kids gossiping about Darius's wrecked arm and how the bully won't be returning anytime soon, which earns him a sharp reprimand from Highfried for losing focus. Aster cheerfully snaps back to attention, swearing that just for today, he'll be on his absolute best behavior, especially since his sisters ordered him to come back alive. The heavy stone doors to the throne room slowly grind open, revealing a long red carpet, and as a guard announces their arrival, a mocking laugh echoes from the shadows. A voice dryly notes that it's been over a decade since Highfried last set foot in this hall, a taunt coming from an imposing elderly man with a thick gray beard and a glowing red eye. The Viscount immediately drops to one knee to respectfully greet the 6th head of the family, quickly correcting his formal title to a deeply reverent one as he bows before his grandfather. Our boy keeps his head down but his eyes sharp, clocking the elderly man as the absolute monster lurking in Elmheim's shadow, identifying him as Zenith Elmheim, the 6th head of the main family. Scanning the peanut gallery, he notes the former branch heads and the highest-ranking executives. He even spots a few familiar faces from the sword dance gathering glaring daggers at him. But as he checks the room, he realizes a certain red-caped menace is missing, a suspicion the seated 6th head confirms by stating that Duke Roderick isn't here. The executives explain that the commander of the Royal Knights is far too busy for trivial business, leaving the old war horses to handle the paperwork. Kneeling silently, our hero reflects that in his previous life, he never survived long enough to meet these men. But he knows that assembling this much brass without the current head means Zenith still pulls all the strings. Highfried nervously speaks up to ask what exactly this trivial business entails, and one of the cloaked executives just smirks, suggesting the Viscount already knows why they were dragged here. The elder brings up the sword dance gathering, recalling the massive shockwave and crater Highfried's little adopted stray smashed into the arena. Highfried tries to defend the boy, pointing out that Duke Roderick already settled the matter, even if it was just a show for the public, but an executive barks that the prestigious Elmheim brand was tarnished, and that adopting a kid of unknown origin was a huge mistake from day one. The council's dark intent hangs heavy in the air, making it crystal clear they plan to exile our hero and severely punish the Viscount for his lapse in judgment, refusing to let his father take the fall. Aster steps up and loudly claims sole responsibility for the crater. He desperately insists that Hyfried had nothing to do with it, but an older executive just closes his eyes and shakes his head. The sheer weight of the silent dismissal stuns the teen, and the rest of the council piles on to mock his total lack of discipline for daring to interrupt an adult conversation. Then a commander in a red cape steps into the center of the hall, boasting about the 12,000 knights under their banner. He warns that despite those staggering numbers, the Elmheim forces are far from a unified mass. He points out that ambition runs deep in their ranks, with countless people eyeing the top seat like hungry tigers, and he glares at Hyfried, making it obvious he thinks a traitor is sitting right in front of him. Tapping a wooden cane against the floor, he demands proof that the Viscount isn't a threat to the main family, and Hyfried flinches as a blade is suddenly leveled at his throat. The commander grips the black and silver cross-shaped sword to taunt the older man about his past failures, cruelly reminding the Viscount that Duke Roderick sliced off his arm in this exact chamber for dragging the Elmheim name through the mud. Zenith leans forward, his single red eye glowing with malice, and drops a completely unhinged ultimatum, ordering the Viscount to sever Aster's head himself this time. Our boy's eyes widen in shock as the ruthless execution order drops on him out of nowhere. But Hyfried doesn't even flinch, refusing the command even with a blade pressed to his throat, leaving our guy in awe as his father declares he would gladly take his own life before ever cutting down his child. The red-caped commander lets out a heavy sigh, taps his staff against the stone floor, and decides that if the Viscount wants to die, his whole family will perish with him, summoning a swarm of shadowy assassins to wipe them out. Right on cue, the armored silhouettes lunge forward, their red eyes glowing as they close in for the kill. But Hyfried just clicks his tongue in annoyance and readies his stance. But before the Viscount can strike, our boy steps right in front of him and boldly asks the elders what they're so afraid of. Zenith is completely taken aback by the sheer audacity, and even with a dozen blades pressed against his throat, Aster fearlessly taunts the grown adults for trembling at a kid, daring them to just kill him if they're that scared. He grips his red cravat, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper as he warns them about laying a single finger on his family, and the raw intensity radiating from the teen leaves the entire council in stunned silence. Aster shoots an apology to his dad for breaking his promise to stay quiet, then rips his shirt off and tosses it into the air, and the armored guards immediately gasp in terror at what's underneath. A massive red crest burns brightly across our hero's bare back. An overwhelming wave of magical energy floods the room as Aster declares that if they touch his family, his 7 wings will become Elmheim's greatest enemy, and glaring at the shadow rulers with a fiercely glowing yellow eye, he tells them to think very carefully about their next move. The Grand Hall falls dead silent as the blonde mustached observer stammers in pure disbelief, while Zenith Elmheim confirms the impossible, leaving the bald elder and the rest of the council completely paralyzed as they realize a 7-wing crest hasn't appeared on a human in hundreds of years. Sweat pours down the observer's face as it sinks in that the mark is undeniably genuine, prompting Zenith to step forward, his voice dropping to a deadly serious tone to ask our boy if he truly understands the weight of flashing that god-tier power right in the heart of the main house. Completely unfazed by the steel at his throat, Aster just smirks and shoots back that he knows exactly how much his wings freak people out. This audacious flex actually draws a loud laugh from the blue-haired man, who claps his hands in amusement and casually apologizes for the outburst, urging the old men to keep the interrogation going. So, Zenith takes the floor again to break down the ancient lore, explaining that wing crests were originally magical organs gifted to humanity by spirits. Over countless generations, mankind cultivated and deepened this borrowed strength. But despite centuries of evolution, no human has ever reached the pinnacle of 7 wings. The only beings in existence to ever hold that kind of power were the original spirit clan themselves. Aster narrows his glowing eyes to ask if Zenith is implying he belongs to that mythical clan, and the elder admits that if the mark is genuine, it changes everything. Viscount Hyfried watches silently from the sidelines, confident his son can handle the standoff, as Aster steps forward to firmly declare that he is the Viscount's son. He doesn't care about ancient origins. He only wants to know if Elmheim is ready to make him an enemy. Our hero points out that if they cast him out, plenty of rival knightly houses would kill to recruit a 7 wings. Leaning in, Aster warns that he'd become a massive threat to their already fragile grip on power, meaning they should actually want to keep him close, and the elders flinch, visibly shaken by the undeniable logic of the teenager's threat. Aster already knows from his previous life that a devastating civil war is destined to tear the kingdom apart. He knows that to ensure his family's survival this time around, he has to take massive risks to flush out his true allies, and Zenith just chuckles darkly, challenging the kid's inflated sense of self-worth as he questions whether those 7 wings are even genuine. Our boy just smiles right back, boldly inviting the elder to kill him on the spot if he really thinks they're fake, which earns him a lethal glare from Zenith, who warns that such a reckless move would spark an all-out war. Aster quietly clenches his fist, fully aware the Elmheim head could crush him like a bug right now. But he holds his ground to see if the old man takes the bait, while fingers tap rhythmically against a knee as the tension in the grand hall reaches a boiling point, until a man in a red cloak finally sighs, pointing out that this standoff is just going in circles. Sensing an opening, Count Maze leans forward with a sinister smile and suggests they put the kid to a trial right here. And though the blonde-mustached observer is outraged, Maze shuts him down by reminding the room they all want to see the true power of the 7 wings. He slyly adds that they can always decide what to do with the boy after the demonstration, a challenge our hero confidently accepts as he asks if the greatest warrior clan has a suitable test prepared. He glances at the blue-haired noble to analyze the man's subtle manipulation of the room, and a triumphant smirk crosses his face as he realizes Maze is secretly on his side, prompting Zenith to take the bait and tap his staff against the floor, ordering the boy to follow him so he can fulfill a grandfather's duty and teach his cheeky grandson a proper lesson. Aster peers into the pitch-black pit, noting how dark the trial ground is, which Zenith explains is an old underground bunker connected to the waterway. His eyes flaring a menacing red, the elder reveals they keep a magical beast locked down there, and our boy's only trial is to kill it. Before he takes the plunge, Highfried scolds him for recklessly flashing his 7 wings, but Aster just hauls the gate open, insisting that a power this massive couldn't stay a secret forever, leaving the Viscount to sigh and offer a final warning to stay sharp. So, with a confident promise to return, my guy grabs a dangling chain and swings straight down into the abyss. As he drops, Aster keeps his glowing eye locked on Count Maze's smiling face above until he lands with a heavy splash on the wet stone floor, muttering about the absolute darkness. The bunker is completely engulfed in shadows, but thanks to his golden vision, the pitch-black arena is perfectly clear to him, though he suddenly freezes in shock at what he spots lying in the dirt. A severed head, left to rot while Zenith's voice echoes from above, mocking the previous victim for dying such a pathetic death. Out of the shadows steps the culprit, a towering blue beast with fresh blood still dripping from its jaws. Our boy immediately draws his blade as the elder warns him not to be a disappointment, and as the monster unleashes a deafening roar, the deadly trial officially begins. Down in the underground bunker, our boy stands his ground, confirming the dark rumors that the main house keeps a literal monster locked in the basement. A quick memory flashes of Darius's severed arm from the previous timeline, making Aster actually pity his brother for a split second for being raised in this absolute freak show of a family. But there's no time for sympathy as the massive blue beast lunges, forcing our hero to swiftly sidestep the attack and leave a blazing trail of red energy in his wake. Up in the viewing gallery, the lesser nobles gasp in horror at the clash, but Aster just smirks, casually noting that his sister Kudo is way scarier than this oversized mutt, until the creature suddenly begins to mutate, its body bulging with a sickening dark purple aura. Aster's cocky smile instantly vanishes as disgusting tentacles erupt from the monster's blue flesh, and it lets out a terrifying shriek, proving it isn't just a simple magic beast, but a rotting undead. Gripping the iron bars of the viewing grate, Viscount Highfried panics over why such an abomination is kept beneath the mansion, while Zenith casually plays it off, claiming the decaying freak just wandered in looking for an all-you-can-eat corpse buffet. Zenith reveals that years ago they realized they couldn't kill the beast, so they captured it as a perfect opponent for testing strength. Zenith boasts that having a pet monster makes getting rid of bodies incredibly convenient. But the blonde observer with a mustache points out that even elite knights struggle against the undead and asks if the Elder Lord is intentionally sending the boy to die for nothing, to which Zenith callously replies that if Aster falls, they can just harvest his corpse for their own gain. Count Maze listens to the old men gloat in silence, narrowing his eyes as he mutters about the big game our hero just talked. Count Maze demands he not die easily, while down in the pit, our boy starts spamming massive red energy waves, but Aster quickly realizes his physical cuts are having zero impact. The beast's insane regeneration knits its rotting flesh back together instantly, so he analyzes his opponent, remembering his textbook lessons on how to put down the dead. You either have to burn them to ash in direct sunlight, or purify their core with a holy weapon, and if you lack both, the only real option is to run for your life. But retreat obviously isn't an option here, and our boy refuses to rely on basic survival tactics anyway. Determined to prove his worth to the elders above, He draws his sword and plans to overpower the undead with sheer strength, unleashing a massive downward slash of red energy. The force of the impact shatters the arena floor, and up top, the blonde man with a mustache slumps to the ground in terror at the raw power of the seven wings. The rest of the nobles press their faces against the grate, desperate to see through the dust, and Zenith just peers down with an unreadable expression, waiting for the smoke to clear as Aster stands ready in the rubble. But Zenith just scoffs and calls the massive strike a complete waste of magic. And as Aster dashes forward, he is violently launched backward through the air by a sudden attack. He slams into the dirt, and the undead lion immediately pins him to the ground, roaring triumphantly as its purple tentacles flail wildly. Up at the grate, Highfried screams the boy's name in pure panic. He grabs the bars to jump down and save him, but Count Maze calmly steps in his way. The Viscount furiously demands to know if they are just supposed to stand by and watch our boy die, but the blue-haired noble just smiles and tells him to relax. Count Maze gestures down at the pit, noting that the kid still has a trump card up his sleeve. Pinned beneath the beast, our hero is bathed in a glowing blue light, and he flashes a smile as his trap finally springs. He calmly observes that the monster has slimmed down after taking his previous attack, then channels a concentrated crimson aura straight into his blade. With a sudden surge of power, Aster thrusts the sword upward to pierce straight through the beast's lower jaw, and a geyser of dark blood erupts from its mouth. Aster doesn't give the creature a second to breathe and launches into a furious barrage of strikes, vowing to cut it until it dies, his weapon carving through the air to leave a violent vortex of red energy in its wake. Up at the grate, Highfried remembers his own training, and initially recognizes the stance as a technique he taught the boy years ago. But as the crimson shockwave completely shatters the arena's massive chains, the Viscount realizes Aster has evolved it into something entirely different. The sheer destructive force is so intense that the spectators panic as the entire underground bunker starts to collapse around them. The terrified guards beg Zenith to evacuate before the floor gives out, but the old man just stares down into the crumbling pit, his red eye wide with realization. Because as our hero stands smiling amidst the swirling destruction, the Elder is finally forced to acknowledge the terrifying, undeniable power of the Seven Wings. As the dust finally settles in the underground bunker, the blonde observer is left coughing and bewildered, peering over the shattered ledge to search for any sign of the undead beast. But Zenith quickly pieces together the impossible truth. Our boy didn't just defeat the immortal creature, he dragged it into a vortex of pure magic and ground it to absolute dust. It wasn't some refined technique, just an overwhelming brute force display of the Seven Wings' raw power, prompting an Elder to turn on Viscount Highfried and accuse him of secretly assisting the kid. But the Viscount is just as shell-shocked, staring wide-eyed at his son's terrifying growth, until Count Maze steps up with a sly smile to formally ask the Elders for their verdict, and an Elder just crosses his arms, his glowing red eyes narrowing in defeat, so Maze happily calls down into the pit to announce that Aster has officially passed the trial. Down in the crater, our hero casually brushes the dust off his torn shirt and flashes a cheeky smile, asking if someone could toss down a rope since he accidentally vaporized his climbing chain. Later, up in Zenith's private office, the old man asks if our boy is finally satisfied, and Aster confirms he has zero interest in fighting for the main house succession, insisting his true home is with the Viscount, a statement the Elder finds laughably modest. Zenith leans in to lock his piercing gaze onto the teen's glowing golden eyes, fully aware this kid is hiding a massive ambition, and bluntly asks if he plans to turn his blade on Elmheim itself. Our hero tenses up, but the old man just chuckles and asks if Duke Roderick is his real target. Zenith waves off the tension, assuring the boy he isn't here to pry into his secrets, but Aster narrows his eyes, confused as to why the head of the family would tolerate a potential rebel. The Elder explains that the main house isn't entirely unified, and Roderick has grown far too strong-willed for his liking, so if our guy's existence can serve as a check against the Duke's growing power, Zenith is more than happy to let him live. He does issue one chilling warning though, making it clear that if the kid ever bares his fangs at the main house again, he won't be so forgiving. A threat Aster brushes off with a scoff as he slams the door behind him and mutters curses at the old monster. Back out in the Grand Hall, Highfried anxiously asks how the meeting went, and is absolutely floored when our boy reveals he flat-out rejected a spot in the main house. The blue-haired noble steps forward, remarking that it's a shame since the kid could have enjoyed a life of absolute privilege, prompting Aster to finally identify him as Count Maze. When asked why he bothered helping during the trial, the Count feigns innocence, claiming he only felt like teasing an annoyingly cocky child, before officially dubbing him the legendary Seven Wings Boy and pointing out into the hall with a calculating gleam in his eye. The surrounding elites are already buzzing, debating whether to recruit the kid or assassinate him before he becomes a real problem. So Maze leans in to warn our boy that his legendary crest means a massive target is now painted on his back. Aster shoots him a sharp look, straight up accusing the Count of being one of those exact opportunists, which makes the nobleman blink, momentarily taken aback by the kid's sharp intuition. Recovering his smooth smile, he casually drops that he sits on the board of the prestigious Knight Academy, and he gestures to the other vultures in the room, pointing out that scouting promising talent is just part of the game. With a cheerful wave goodbye, he declares he's looking forward to the day the boy finally enrolls, but Aster just watches him walk away, deciding it's way too soon to trust this enigmatic noble. Stepping up beside him, Viscount Highfried gently pats his son's shoulder, suggesting they finally head home. The proud father is absolutely beaming, eager to tell Alphen and the rest of the family all about Astor's grand performance. But my guy just breaks into a nervous sweat, realizing his mother is going to faint the second she gets a look at his bandaged wounds. Meanwhile, over at Duke Roderick's estate, the captain of the knights drops to one knee to deliver a grim report about Darius dying in the trial, but the Duke sits on his throne completely unfazed, brushing past his own son's demise to ask about Highfried's boy instead. The armored captain mutters about the sheer ice in his master's veins before continuing his briefing, but Roderick cuts him off, smirking as he points out that the kid truly did possess the 7 wings. The knight gasps, absolutely floored that his lord already knew the impossible truth. He warns that if they leave this anomaly unchecked, Elmheim's entire power structure is going to completely collapse. The captain begs for permission to take immediate action, but Roderick coldly commands him to stand down. He arrogantly declares that if their house could be shaken by a mere child, it would have crumbled into dust long ago. Leaning back with his eyes glowing full of dark ambition, he vows that those legendary wings will eventually be his to claim, so until then, he is perfectly content to let the boy roam free and see just how hard the infant he failed to catch back then can struggle. He flashes a wicked smile, eagerly looking forward to whatever bloody entertainment Ash is going to provide. 4 years later, the courtyard of the Dorlethil Knight Academy is absolutely packed with eager applicants, and the registration officials are barking orders left and right just to keep the massive crowd moving. Suddenly, whispers ripple through the ranks as a rumored figure steps onto the grounds, though the onlookers stare in total disbelief, having expected someone way more intimidating up at the front desk. An official slides over a mandatory liability waiver and warns that the kingdom takes zero responsibility for anyone who dies during the exam. He strictly demands to see the new arrival's wing crest to verify his magic, but as he glances down at the signed paperwork, his eyes practically bulge out of his skull at the name Aster F. Elmheim. The official completely freezes, paralyzed by the weight of that legendary surname, while our hero, now a seriously muscular young man, casually scratches his head and admits his mark is in a bit of an awkward place to show off. Flashing a confident smirk, he jokes that they should really just let him pass based on his handsome face alone. But out in the bustling courtyard of the Royal Knights Academy, not everyone is rolling out the red carpet. A voice suddenly barks through the crowd, trying to get our hero's attention, and Aster glances over his shoulder as a burly veteran marches right up to him. The man introduces himself as Bigger Smythe, immediately writing the kid off as some backwater noble who wandered into the wrong place. He points to the grand entrance, reminding him that this is the selection exam for the elite Royal Knights, but our boy just shrugs it off and turns to leave, which only pisses Smythe off more. The veteran launches into a lecture about how everyone here has grinded for years just for a shot at this exam, mocking the tiny dagger dangling at Astor's hip and calling him a baby chick who doesn't belong. Smythe then waves off the gathering crowd, telling them to scram, but a couple of onlookers just whisper among themselves, totally used to this guy bullying the rookies every single year. They're much more interested in his target, recognizing the kid from the wild rumors coming out of Elmheim, and Smythe freezes in his tracks when he overhears them call the boy Aster of the 7 Wings. Before the veteran can even process that title, another voice chimes in to mockingly call our boy his cousin. Aster's golden eyes narrow into a sharp glare as he spots Grion Elmheim, one of his adoptive brothers from the main house, strolling up with a fake smile. The newcomer immediately takes a jab at our hero's mysterious origins, claiming he just decided to use the word cousin, since no one actually knows where the kid came from, but my guy completely ignores the insult and quietly apologizes for Darius's death instead. Grion just waves it off, saying a disgrace like that deserved to die. He complains that the older brother was always throwing his weight around and being a nuisance anyway, before leaning in to warn Aster that he doesn't care about this 7 Wings hype and that he really shouldn't look down on the main house elites. He smirks, reminding Aster that out here, Viscount Highfried isn't around to protect him anymore, which leaves the rest of the applicants sweating bullets as they realize there are 2 Elmheims in their exam batch. Knowing the bitter rivalry between the main and branch houses, the bystanders are just praying they don't get caught in the crossfire, until Smythe awkwardly shuffles up to our hero, stammering as he tries to backtrack his earlier insults. Aster just blinks, looking a bit confused by the sudden groveling, before letting out a warm chuckle and extending a hand, politely introducing himself and telling the older man to just call him Aster. The awkward introductions are cut short as an official steps out onto a high balcony, welcoming the massive crowd to the first exam hall, before another official in a gray uniform launches into a passionate speech about how the Royal Knights are the proud blades who risk their lives, making it perfectly clear that they have absolutely no use for dull, clumsy weapons, and telling them to treat this exam like a real battlefield to prove their true worth. Our boy tunes out the patriotic nonsense, taking a moment to reflect on how far he's come since his days of being powerless and wingless, and he cracks a smile, knowing that beyond these walls lies a tier of warriors he could never even dream of reaching in his past life. Sitting at the absolute pinnacle of that world is Supreme Commander Roderick, and Aster knows he has to carve a path straight through the kingdom's elite, silently vowing to catch up to the man soon enough. But to reach that goal, he first has to actually pass this exam. Up on the balcony, the examiner suddenly raises his hand, launching a massive barrage of spears straight down into the courtyard, and one of the heavy lances instantly punches right through a large armored man's skull. As the lifeless body hits the dirt, the official formally announces the first test as the trial of arrows, even though those are literal spears, with one simple rule: whoever is still standing at the end of the onslaught will pass. Total panic erupts through the hall, as the applicants realize this isn't a standard test, but a brutal slaughter, and men scramble frantically for their lives, screaming that standing still is a guaranteed death sentence. A handful of veterans manage to group up and form a tight defensive circle to deflect the falling steel, catching the eye of a gray-haired observer up on the balcony who notes that the repeat takers at least know the drill, though he casually adds that the survival rate for this bloodbath is still only about 30%. Down below, a blonde applicant's guard breaks as a spear brutally impales him through the chest, proving the official's point that relying on basic swordplay will only get you so far. What the Academy is really looking for are the overwhelming, impossible solutions that only true wing crest holders can pull off. Across the room, the panicking applicants look over in horror as our boy just stands completely still amidst the deadly rain, and Grian smirks maliciously, assuming the idiot has frozen in fear and is about to become a pincushion, but Aster just calmly drops his hand to the hilt of his small dagger, and in a flash, he draws the blade, unleashing a massive swirling vortex of red energy that blasts the entire barrage away. The onlookers' jaws practically hit the floor as the red energy clears, revealing our hero standing dead center in the eye of the storm, having effortlessly swatted away the entire lethal barrage without taking a single scratch. And with those golden eyes flaring, he flashes a cocky smirk and dares the examiners to bring the whole damn arsenal right to his front door. True to his word, Aster's massive red whirlwind effortlessly swallows the entire barrage of black projectiles, generating a tempest so massive that the surviving candidates are forced to shield themselves just from the blowback. One observer is left completely speechless, realizing not a single arrow even grazed our guy. And up in the stands, a gray-haired instructor smiles, thoroughly impressed by Aster's god-tier magic control to spin that energy into a perfect defensive air current. The red storm continues to rage around our hero like a localized hurricane, until the winds finally die down and the exhausted survivors look around in absolute disbelief. The gray-haired observer notes that more candidates made it through than he anticipated, but it hardly matters, because the booming voice of the examiner suddenly echoes across the stone arena, congratulating everyone still standing for clearing the first phase of the exam. But there's zero time to celebrate, as a blonde instructor immediately barks at the exhausted teens to fall in line and head to the next site, and trudging through the courtyard, Bigger Smythe groans about the demonic pace, complaining about being forced to march right after surviving a literal rain of arrows, only for our boy to cheekily ask if the older guy is already worn out. The veteran does a double take, completely baffled as to how the kid still looks fresh as a daisy, while up on a balcony, the gray-haired official realizes that unleashing that much magic without breaking a sweat proves the rumors about the boy's legendary moniker are dead on, and he absolutely can't wait to see how the kid actually fights. Meanwhile, marching through the stone corridors with a full entourage of guards, Grian Elmheim arrives on the scene. A few days ago, Grian received a strict order from a seated woman at the main house. Whatever it takes, he had to stop Aster from becoming a royal knight. With a determined glare, Grian vows to eliminate the threat for the future of his family, while back outside, the brown-haired instructor announces that for the sake of fairness, everyone will be using identical standard-issue swords for the next test. Smythe groans about the hassle as they swap their gear, and when Aster curiously asks if this rule is new, the veteran just shrugs it off, noting that for middle-class knight brats like them, the standard blades aren't much of a downgrade anyway. But a neat black-haired candidate points out the obvious, guessing the examiners are just terrified of our hero's weird magic-devouring blade, an observation that leaves Aster blinking in mild amusement. The casual vibe shatters the second Grian struts onto the scene, mockingly praising his relative for already taming a follower, which makes Smythe snap at the insult until the orange-haired noble smirks, instantly recognizing the veteran as the heir of the lowly Baronhouse Smythe. Looming over him, Grian drops a heavy threat, warning the third-rate country noble that wagging his tail at the wrong person is a quick way to get killed, a warning that makes the veteran instantly break into a cold sweat and fold, desperately pleading that he has absolutely nothing to do with Aster. Watching his temporary ally completely throw him under the bus, my guy realizes the vibes here are absolutely atrocious. Before things can escalate, the gray-haired instructor steps up to announce the rules for the second exam, a three-way team battle for territory, where the candidates will be split into 3 squads to fight over bases marked by colored flags scattered throughout the forest. And as they picture a student violently slashing a rival, he makes it crystal clear that their new swords are literal permission slips to kill. With the brutal rules established, he readies the flags to announce the rosters, revealing Grion leading the red team, a blonde kid on yellow, and Aster stuck on the blue team right alongside the cowardly Smythe. Moments later, Aster spots a signal fire flaring into the sky to mark the official start of the exam, so he gathers his blue team around their flag to explain that they need to control at least 2 bases to win, but Smythe quickly does the math and realizes the grim reality of those rules, prompting a brown-haired teammate to start panicking, knowing that passing means they'll inevitably have to cross swords with Grion's red team. Our boy just stares at them in genuine confusion, completely blind to the problem, before Smythe sighs in exasperation and bluntly admits that they're terrified. The veteran explains that Grion isn't just some random student, but a bona fide elite from the Elmheim main house, and pointing a sword at him, even in a sanctioned exam, means kissing your knightly career goodbye forever, since in the worst-case scenario, the tyrannical family will just slaughter your entire bloodline in retaliation. Seeing the squad completely paralyzed by fear, Aster asks if they're really just going to forfeit, and Smythe bitterly confirms that surviving beats throwing their lives away. With a self-deprecating smile, the older man tells our hero that a monster like him could never understand the despair of the weak, so accepting their surrender, the teen dashes off into the forest alone, mildly annoyed to be running solo in a team-based test. But as he runs, he admits to himself that he can't really blame them. A memory from his past life surfaces, showing a slick-haired man echoing that exact same resentment about being crushed under the boots of the strong. With a wry smile, our boy notes the irony that, to the rest of the world, he's just another weakling too, before he slows his pace near a stone archway, suddenly realizing the forest is suspiciously quiet, and wonders if the other teams are just playing it safe, though his sharp instincts tell him something is definitely wrong. Suddenly, a silver-haired teen steps out of the shadows, amused that our hero actually showed up by himself, flashing a smirk as he notes that things are playing out exactly as he predicted. Aster narrows his eyes, completely thrown off by the mention of a mystery third party pulling the strings. But before he can piece it together, a blonde teen from the yellow team steps up with his camp's flag in hand. He tosses the cloth high into the air to issue his challenge, arrogantly demanding that Aster keep him entertained, and a drop of sweat rolls down our boy's face as the reality of the coordinated ambush sets in. The blonde kid draws his sword, his eyes flashing a dangerous blue, leaving our guy's brain completely short-circuiting as he braces for a brutal 2-on-1 jumping. Meanwhile, across the forest, the wind howls around a heavily armed squad of red team members, and leading the pack with a sinister smile is Grion, declaring that he's about to show his relative what it truly means to fight like an Elmheim. The second stage of the Kingdom Knight selection exam kicks off with a siege battle, splitting the 20 participants into 3 teams where planting a flag in an enemy base is the only way to pass. Down in the forest, our boy locks blades with a blonde teen, pushing back hard against the clash of red and yellow energy, and demands to know why his opponent was assigned to the yellow team, but is suddenly flying a red flag. The blonde teen just smirks, revealing he's already formed an alliance with the Elmheim family. Up in the stands, a teal-haired observer watches the clash and recognizes the blonde fighter as Christopher Nolan. He notes that while Nolan was completely overshadowed by Aster in the first exam, the swordsman was still one of the only 2 candidates to survive the deadly arrow barrage without breaking a sweat. Nearby, Count Maze watches the duel intently, lamenting that only one of these unpolished gems can actually pass. Back in the dirt, our boy scoffs at the idea of a true alliance, aggressively swinging his blade to remind his opponent that only one team can actually win. But Nolan just counters with a flash of his glowing yellow sword, casually dropping the galaxy brain reveal that he's throwing the match to the main house, while his squad raids Aster's base. Aster immediately pictures Smythe and the rest of his squad lying defeated in the dirt. Sweating, our hero realizes Grion must have threatened his opponent with the full wrath of the Elmheim family. Nolan doesn't deny it, writing the betrayal off as simple self-preservation against a runaway carriage as he steps forward firmly to lecture the teen on the strict hierarchy of the nobility. He brings his sword down hard with a claim that this is just how the strong survive, but as Aster blocks the heavy strike, he hears a sickening crack as his own blade begins to splinter. A sudden memory shows the examiner handing him this exact weapon, and the realization hits that his gear was rigged from the very start. Nolan charges forward, his blade flaring with a fierce yellow aura, and calls our boy a show-off as he brings the heavy strike down, completely shattering the rigged weapon into pieces. But Aster doesn't even blink, calmly snatching a falling shard of his own broken steel and flooding it with his signature red magic. He launches himself into the air to deliver a brutal downward slash, and Nolan barely manages to raise his guard in time, sparks flying as the counterattack catches him completely off guard. But instead of pressing the advantage, Aster abruptly breaks off the engagement and dashes toward the forest archway. He shouts back over his shoulder that he'll deal with this duel later because he just spotted a much bigger score to settle first. Left standing in the dust, Nolan smugly assumes he just struck fear into the infamous Seven Wings boy, until he glances down at the dirt and picks up the shattered tip of his opponent's blade, realizing the metal is just a cheap knockoff. Annoyed, the blonde teen crushes the shard in his grip, completely disappointed that Elmheim's dirty tricks just robbed him of a real fight. Meanwhile, our boy sprints back to his own base, desperately shouting for Smythe, but instead of his ally, he finds Grion casually perched on the stone wall. Flanked by guards, the blonde noble smirks and mocks Aster for bragging that he alone was enough to win this exam, casually revealing that his forces just captured the third base to lock down total domination over the map. Furious, Aster glares up at the wall and demands to know what his cousin did to his team. Grion just stares back down in cold, stoic silence, right before a blade is suddenly pressed against Aster's spine. The guy holding the sword is his own brown-haired teammate, who awkwardly apologizes for the betrayal, though our hero calmly admits he saw this coming from the start. The traitor mutters that only an absolute idiot would dare defy the main house, sending Grion into a fit of laughter from up on the wall as he mocks the countryside monkeys for surrendering without a fight, completely unfazed by the swords at his throat. Aster coldly asks if his cousin really thinks a numerical advantage is enough to beat him, but Grion just smiles down at him, arrogantly declaring that the match is already over. The rules of the siege battle are simple: hold 2 bases by the time the clock runs out, and a masked man steps up with his blade drawn, taunting that even if our boy runs around planting flags all day, he has absolutely zero manpower left to defend them. The strategy is painfully simple. The second he leaves to claim another base, they'll just walk right in and raise the red flag again, and Grion holds up 2 fingers, absolutely certain this foolproof plan guarantees a win. But our boy just glares up at the wall, warning them he'll have to make sure they can't do that by cutting every single one of them down. The sheer bloodlust radiating from his glowing yellow eye makes the heavily armed guards sweat in fear, but Grion just smiles, calling the bluff. He points out that the teen's standard-issue sword is already shattered, and without a weapon, his legendary 7 wings mean absolutely nothing. His cousin smugly challenges him to try taking on the entire army barehanded, but Aster just smirks, gripping the hilt of his ruined blade. He admits he's actually impressed by the ambush, leaving the brown-haired traitor completely shocked by his calm demeanor. Our hero casually tosses the useless hilt away, totally unfazed by the overwhelming odds. Grion's eyes glow a sinister orange, absolutely convinced he's already won this fight, but as the discarded hilt clatters uselessly against the stone, our boy's gaze flares with a terrifying golden light, ready to show his arrogant cousin that a true monster doesn't need a weapon to slaughter his prey. At the captured base, our boy drops his broken hilt, sarcastically praising Grion for pulling off such a solid ambush. The blonde noble smirks, completely convinced he's finally eliminated his biggest threat. But the second that useless metal clatters against the stone, Aster vanishes, moving way faster than the eye can track. He reappears right in front of the older man in gray, and buries his boot deep into his gut. The official is sent flying backward as his weapon slips from his grasp. So Aster casually snatches the falling blade right out of the air, and with a single fluid motion, he unleashes a massive wave of red energy that crushes the man straight into the dirt. Up on the wall, Grion watches his flawless ambush unravel in seconds, and Aster just points his stolen blade right up at his arrogant brother, coldly declaring that showing his face was a fatal mistake. The blonde noble curses as he finally realizes he's dealing with an absolute monster. But before he can even blink, our hero detonates his red aura against the stone and launches himself straight into the sky, clearing the massive gap in a single bound. Grion freezes in sheer disbelief as the attack descends on him, and Aster delivers a devastating slash that shatters the guy's weapon and sends him plummeting. He remembers feeling this exact sensation of flight for the very first time when his infant body is launched into the winter sky. Our boy revels in that familiar, intoxicating rush of absolute control over his mana. He grabs Grion by the collar midair, mocking how small the once imposing Elmheim wall looks from up here. The blonde noble begs for mercy, his previous arrogance completely shattered. But Aster shows zero pity, raising his glowing red blade high. He flashes a terrifying golden-eyed smile and brings the weapon down to trigger a massive, arena-shattering explosion. A thick cloud of dust swallows the battlefield, leaving Bigger Smythe and the rest of the candidates to watch from below in stunned silence. Smythe's eyes widen in sheer horror as the dust begins to clear, and our boy casually strolls out of the smoke, dragging Grion by the collar. His glowing yellow eyes pierce the haze with pure menace as he grabs his battered brother and hoists him up for the whole crowd to see, and unceremoniously tosses him into the dirt like garbage. The humiliated noble screams from the ground, demanding to know why his men are just standing there, desperately ordering his team to hurry up and kill the kid. But the guards just hesitate, terrified of the Seven Wings boy, even as they remind each other it's an order from the main house. Pushed to his breaking point, Smythe curses and grips his blade, but our boy just stares him down and asks if they're really that terrified of Elmheim's retaliation. The veteran snaps, screaming that a third-rate noble house like his would be crushed like ants if they ever defied the main house. He drops to his knees, admitting that bottom-tier weaklings have zero choice but to roll over and play the submissive dog just to survive, and the distressed man insists that for someone who has everything, these struggles must be incomprehensible. Aster just listens in silence, and a small knowing smile creeps onto his face, which only makes Smythe demand to know what's so damn funny. Our boy tells Smythe that his sister once said something similar, reminding him that he has no idea what it feels like to have absolutely nothing. He admits that while he has his own reasons, he can't deny he's currently sitting on a mountain of overwhelming power, and he proves it by dropping the tip of his stolen sword right against Grion's throat, forcing a terrified squeal from the fallen noble. Because he holds this blessing, our hero declares there is only one thing left for him to do. He vows to completely crush the arrogant, overbearing Elmheim family into the dirt. The surrounding candidates gasp, absolutely floored by the sheer audacity of the threat, and even Grion stares up from the ground in utter confusion, while Smythe stammers out a warning, realizing the terrifying weight of what the kid just said. But Aster doesn't flinch, and he confirms without a second of hesitation that this is a formal declaration of war. He warns the terrified crowd that fawning over the current regime will only drag them down into a miserable, bloody abyss of betrayal. He tells the onlookers that if they want out of that nightmare, they have to stand up and fight for it, spreading his arms wide to declare that his 7 wings were given to him for this exact purpose. Smythe just stares in stunned silence as the weight of the choice hangs over him, while Grion starts shrieking from the dirt, promising hell if any of his men dare to betray him, screaming that they know exactly what will happen to them if they do. But bigger Smythe is visibly trembling, pushed right to the breaking point. The veteran bully lets out a raw scream of frustration and drops his weapon to the ground, finally making his choice. He charges forward to demand if our boy is truly capable of tearing the Elmheim Empire down, warning that if this is all just false hope, he'll resent him for the rest of his life. Aster meets his desperate gaze and solemnly promises to see it through to the end. And with his resolve finally hardened, Smythe raises his blue flag high into the air, officially pledging his loyalty. Smythe screams his allegiance to Aster F. Elmheim for the entire forest to hear. The declaration sends a massive shockwave through the onlookers as they realize Grion's foolproof trap has just crumbled to dust, leaving the battered noble to grind his teeth in the dirt, cursing the backwater nobody who just cost him everything. Smythe stands over a defeated guard and screams at the courtyard, demanding to know why the rest of the candidates are just standing around when they finally have a chance to stick it to the arrogant Elmheim elites, doubling down on the hype as he roars at the crowd to bet everything on the 7 wings, and though the onlookers murmur nervously, still terrified of the ruling family's wrath, our boy stands calmly behind the veteran with a smirk, mentally checking off his first successful proxy so he doesn't have to run around capturing flags all by himself. It's a solid start, but as he scopes out the remaining red-banded guards, he knows he needs a lot more bodies on his side if he's going to completely overthrow the main house. Across the dirt, a battered Grion drops to his knees in absolute disbelief. One of his silver-haired subordinates reaches out to check on him, but the humiliated noble viciously swats the hand away, barking at the useless trash not to touch him. His pride is shattered, but as he glares at the Branch family scum threatening his status, a furious refusal to face the main house in defeat boils over. He grits his teeth, cementing his resolve that he won't end up a discarded failure like his brother. He grips his own bleeding hand, desperately swearing that it can't end here, just as a heavy black boot steps into his view, and a familiar voice casually asks what's wrong. The newcomer casually mocks him for looking so pathetic, and Grion snaps his head around to scream Christopher Nolan's name. He furiously points a shaking finger at our boy in the distance and demands to know why the blonde swordsman hasn't eliminated their target yet, though a manic smile quickly stretches across his face as he banks on his strongest ally to finish the job. The crowd whispers about Nolan's unmatched blade skills, and a frantic Elmheim lackey screams for an immediate attack, only for a red armband to suddenly smash right into his face. Nolan stands perfectly calm with his hand outstretched to announce he just came back to return their team badge. He looks down at the kneeling Grion in disgust, stating that these cowardly tactics violate his sense of chivalry, and officially declares their alliance dead in the water. The surrounding candidates panic as they realize they have no idea who to side with, now that the Nolan family has jumped ship, but Christopher just draws his glowing yellow sword and locks eyes with our hero, ready to settle their own score before this exam ends. Our guy stares right back, completely unfazed, so Christopher readies his blade and proudly frames this duel as a clash between his family's signature swordsmanship and the legendary power of the 7 wings. The blonde teen channels a surge of golden energy into his weapon and lunges forward with a heavy downward slash to prove his technique is superior, but Aster just flares his own red aura, calmly telling him the fight is going to have to wait. Our hero swats the attack aside with a single crushing downward strike of raw red magic, and Christopher is forced to his knees in the shattered dirt, realizing in complete shock that Aster is on a whole new level now. Refusing to back down, Nolan glares up and asks if he's forgotten the rules of the exam, then dashes forward to remind his opponent that only one team can walk away with a passing grade. He swings his blade again, shouting that they have no choice but to settle their score right here and now, but my guy just closes his eyes and casually replies that ending the exam right now would actually be a huge problem for him. Aster calmly tells Nolan that he actually wants him to become a Kingdom Knight too, and as the swordsman stares in complete shock, our boy points out that since Nolan just publicly torched his alliance to stand against the Elmheim family, it would be pretty messed up to crush his dream over a team technicality. He flashes a grin and drops a massive bombshell, claiming he has a plan to make sure every single candidate passes the test, causing the entire clearing to freeze in disbelief, as Smythe immediately shouts that pulling off something like that is impossible. Aster admits he can't guarantee anything, but he's confident it'll work if they all cooperate. And to get things started, he steps toward his battered brother. Grian flinches in terror, but instead of a finishing blow, our hero extends a hand and casually offers a truce. Soon enough, a massive, multicolored flag is hoisted over the stone fortress, and the gray-blue-haired instructor loses his mind, screaming at the candidates for not even knowing how to raise a standard properly. But Aster calmly steps up to explain the massive loophole they just exploited, pointing out that the rules never explicitly stated only one team could occupy a single base, letting a black-haired participant chime in to declare that they've formed an alliance between their teams to jointly occupy all the camps. Another instructor gets right in a student's face and furiously demands to know if they think this exam is a joke, making Bigger Smythe and the rest of the crowd sweat bullets as they realize this peaceful approach might completely backfire. The angry official barks that real knights wouldn't just shake hands with an enemy target and walk away, so our boy casually points out that you would if the enemy was more valuable alive than dead. The examiner fires back that a knight is nothing but the sword of the state, yelling that it isn't a candidate's place to make those kinds of judgment calls. But Aster just stares him down, asking if he's really going to disqualify them all when they haven't broken a single rule. The official starts sweating under the pressure, so our hero leans in close to twist the knife, casually wondering aloud how the main house will react if Grian and the rest of the elites are failed over a bruised ego, and trapped by the sheer political weight of that threat. The examiner just groans in defeat. Smythe is losing his mind after a full hour on standby, while another candidate taps his boot nervously, wondering if they're actually going to survive this. He's terrified the examiners will just fail the whole lot of them, but our boy just shrugs it off, knowing they at least gave the brass a massive headache to debate. While Grian and the rest of the surviving candidates stew in the awkward tension, when Smythe finally asks how the hell he got Elmheim's golden child to play along, the teen just flashes a sly grin, about to drop a cheeky response, before a guard bursts through the double doors and screams for the room to quiet down. The sudden shout jolts the candidates out of their seats, and the announcer demands absolute silence, as Principal Mimir himself steps up to deliver the final verdict. A voice booms through the exam hall to declare that Principal Mimir will now announce the results, and a brown-haired official demands absolute silence from the sea of anxious candidates, prompting Bigger Smythe to lean over to our boy and whisper in total disbelief. He expected some legendary warrior, not an ordinary-looking grandpa, but Aster quickly tells him to show some respect, before the blonde official steps forward to address Aster directly, admitting that accepting this many candidates at once is completely unprecedented in the Academy's history. The official reveals there were proposals for a re-examination, but they ultimately decided to accept his claim. And as Aster sweats and asks what that means, until the older man suddenly breaks into a warm smile, he announces that everyone passes, urging them to continue working hard and prove to the Academy that this wild decision wasn't a mistake. Later that evening, the candidates are officially welcomed to the Dressil Kingdom Knight Academy, and the tension of the brutal exam finally washes away as night falls over the grand campus. Inside the massive bathhouse, Bigger Smythe sinks into the hot water, practically weeping with joy as he praises the huge tubs and delicious food, knowing exactly who to thank. Our boy washes up nearby, trying to finally get a moment of peace, but the rest of the candidates quickly crowd around him to cheer and pledge their loyalty for the rest of their lives, while Christopher Nolan sits on the edge, scoffing at the opportunists who were just licking Grian's boots a few hours ago. When a brown-haired student teases Nolan about losing to Aster, the blonde noble defensively snaps that they agreed to a draw, while our boy brushes it off, pointing out that they defied the Elmheims and still became official candidates. And a bearded man adds that all these small victories will eventually build into a massive wave that crushes the noble family, prompting Aster to declare to his new followers that this is where their rebellion truly begins. Relaxing in the steam, Aster notes that his adoptive sister Alphen is still at the academy, and figures she'll be a valuable ally in navigating the politics before their training begins tomorrow, though he admits he just needs to get used to living in the dorms first. He steps out of the water, noticing a sudden heavy silence falling over the room as the other candidates stare at him with wide eyes, before suddenly swarming our hero, pressing in from all sides to excitedly declare that a living 7 wings must be a good luck charm, hoping to score some divine favor just by praying to him. Aster angrily swats the crowd away, yelling at them to stop literally praying to him, while Christopher Nolan watches the chaotic scene unfold from the sidelines, sighing as he already dreads the massive headache this semester is going to be. Meanwhile, miles away, a dark cloud hangs over the grand Elmheim estate, where the reddish-brown-haired woman glares out a lavish window, her voice dripping with venom. Helen Elmheim turns her glowing pink eyes on Grion, furious that he not only failed to crush the 7 Wings child, but actually let the boy declare war on their family and live to tell the tale, and as Grion prostrates himself on the floor, frantically begging for forgiveness and promising to make up for his massive blunder, a brutal punch slams into his face before he can even finish his sentence. The purple-haired woman follows through on the strike, spitting that there won't be a next time for a piece of trash like him, and knocks him backward while calling him useless scum before Liliane Elmheim compares him to their dead brother Darius, declaring he'd be better off ground into scrap meat. Grion cowers on the floor, desperately begging his sister for mercy, but Liliane just drives a vicious kick into him, sending him flying across the room, where his mind races with pure resentment, blaming our hero for this utter humiliation. A day ago, Grion was lying battered in the dirt after the exam, muttering that it was all Aster's fault when Aster stood over him to demand his cooperation, coldly warning the elite that if the main family found out he was beaten by branch family trash, they would absolutely execute him for the disgrace. But our hero hadn't just blackmailed the noble to secure the win. He had also cornered the corrupt examiner who rigged his sword, bringing up the memory of Darius's gruesome severed head as he grabbed the terrified man by the collar, his yellow eyes glowing with lethal intent, and promised him the exact same fate if he didn't stay quiet and overlook the camp-sharing loophole. A menacing voice echoes through the Elmheim estate with an offer to help the battered Grion out, as the blonde man in the red coat steps from the shadows and orders Liliane to spare their pathetic brother. He mocks Grion for crying and apologizing, before Julius A. Elmheim declares that they are family bound by blood, adding that family needs to get along, as he looks down to ask for a girl's agreement, and the captive is revealed to be Alphen, trapped in a metal half-mask with deadened eyes. Helen watches the twisted scene, noting that the image of Elmheim's absolute dominance is starting to waver with the appearance of a 7 Wings. Turning to Julius and Liliane, Helen issues a chilling order for them to remind the Academy of their power, and Liliane smiles with sadistic anticipation, adding that they aren't just for show, while Julius eagerly agrees to remind everyone what real violence looks like. The newly accepted cadets are thrown straight into rigorous courtyard training, where an unseen instructor barks that they've all been chosen for a shot at the glorious Royal Knights, hyping up the legendary force as an elite unit that overwhelmingly dominates in combat strategy and every other field. Naturally, only the truly exceptional can hope to survive the curriculum and join those ranks, so the physical drills are brutal, with swords clashing and shattering under the immense strain, forcing the cadets to push themselves to their absolute limits as they sweat and curse through the heavy strikes. To separate the weak from the strong, the Academy divides them into 6 distinct ranks based on ability, and higher tiers unlock the most advanced techniques. An instructor barks at the recruits, warning them that relying solely on raw swordplay makes a knight third-rate, and leaning entirely on magic only bumps them up to second-rate. He insists that true first-rate warriors have to master both, while another instructor in red and white aggressively declares that continuously proving their strength is the only freedom they'll get in this place. But the intense speeches are suddenly cut short when a ridiculous display across the courtyard catches everyone's attention. Our boy Aster casually swings his blade, leaving a trail of red energy in its wake, and with a single effortless strike, he cleanly slices a massive purple magic iron pillar right in half. Without missing a beat, a gray-blue-haired instructor moves the goalposts and tells his exasperated trainees to aim for that impossible baseline. Up on a balcony, that casual display of monstrous power catches the eye of the Academy's higher-ups, prompting a dark-haired instructor to ask Principal Mimir if they are looking at the rumored 7 Wings. The older blonde man agrees that crushing a golem-quality magic iron pillar so effortlessly proves our boy is undeniably special, but warns that all his latent potential will go to waste if he gets complacent. If he doesn't keep pushing, he'll be eaten alive by the vicious monsters already nesting in the Academy, who rule over the defeated students. Later, Aster and Bigger Smythe examine their newly assigned rank cards. The veteran bully complains about the Academy's brutal meritocracy, annoyed that out of their entire year, only our boy and Christopher Nolan avoided starting at the absolute bottom. Smythe is stuck down at rank 6, while our hero has already been placed at rank 4, so Aster jokes that the big guy better catch up or they'll be in trouble. Smythe stops in his tracks, playfully calling him a strict boss, a title that leaves the teen genuinely confused until his new subordinate leans in, shocked that he's already forgotten the promise he made. At the end of the entrance exam, Smythe reminded him of his promise to crush Elmheim, pointing out that his declaration of war gave hope to all the desperate candidates who wanted to change their miserable situation. The veteran bully pledged his loyalty right then and there, offering to carry our boy to the top, cementing a promise to crush the tyrannical family together that he fully intended to keep. Remembering that resolve, our hero smiles, agreeing that they have to get even stronger to protect everyone, and he stares down at his rank card, locking in his goal to completely crush the main family. But the serious moment is ruined when Smythe's stomach loudly growls, prompting the veteran bully to insist they grab some grub before the afternoon training kills them. As they head down the hall, they spot a massive, anxious crowd gathered outside one of the rooms. The moment Aster walks up, his new supporters swarm him in a panic, stammering out a warning about Elmheim, but before they can even finish, a casual voice calls out from inside, acknowledging his arrival between bites of bread. Our boy glances through the doorway, completely caught off guard by the intruder. Inside, Julius Elmheim sits arrogantly at a table, casually greeting Aster as his brother. Smythe instantly recognizes the dangerous second son of the main house, and our hero's expression darkens as he confirms it. Julius isn't alone either, flanked by his sinister younger sister, Lillian, and together, these two are known as the Tyrant siblings, infamous for being the most vicious members of the entire family. Aster curses his own oversight, realizing he had completely forgotten they were even enrolled at the academy. Lillian sits perched on a table, sadistically pinning a masked student to the floor with her boot, leaving the captive to sweat and groan helplessly under her weight. Smythe is horrified by the brutal metal muzzle locked onto the poor guy's face, but our boy recognizes it immediately as the infamous iron shackles. Julius ominously chimes in, explaining it's a disciplinary device the main house uses to correct failures, and he drives his boot hard into his own muzzled victim's back, physically dominating the youth. Julius scoffs that this pathetic failure actually carries the Elmheim name, yet still managed to land at the bottom of the barrel in rank 6. He grabs the terrified youth by the muzzle to mock his weakness, and sadistically claims he just gave his little brother a gift to help him work a bit harder. The grim reality of that gift sets in as a whole squad of captive workers is revealed, all locked in the exact same iron traps. A twisted system where food and air are the rewards for compliance, meaning they have to work like their lives depend on it, just to avoid suffocating. The unmuzzled newcomers start to panic, as the lethal stakes of the room finally hit them. But the tyrant just smiles, introducing the masked slaves as their new seniors, and ordering the fresh meat to greet them properly. He turns to a figure waiting in the wings, coaxing them to step forward, and as the heavy boots step into the light, the hint of a tragic reunion hangs in the air. Our hero's eyes blow wide in absolute horror as the realization hits him, while Julius just flashes a twisted smile, taunting him about how different his older sister looks these days. Alphen stands completely motionless, her face locked behind a metal half-mask and her eyes totally blank, prompting Aster to scream her name in gut-wrenching distress. A single bead of sweat rolls down Alphen's cheek as her face twitches, proving she's still conscious and trapped inside that nightmare. And Aster's expression instantly contorts into a mask of unadulterated rage. He grips the hilt of his sword, ready to slaughter every single Elmheim in the room, and furiously screams at the tyrant, demanding to know what he did to his sister. A defeated guard's helmet clatters uselessly against the floor to break the heavy silence, but Julius just sits back in his chair, smiling menacingly as he tells our boy to relax. The metal headpiece belongs to one of the academy's own guards, now lying completely motionless on the floor, and as Julius kicks a pile of helmets right at Aster's feet, it becomes sickeningly clear he's already wiped out the building's security, planting his boot on a fallen body with a twisted grin as he officially welcomes our hero to the party. The masked seniors waste no time carrying out Julius's twisted recruitment drive, while the blonde tyrant watches from the sidelines with threats to keep his men motivated. His orders are simple: beat the juniors into submission and force the metal muzzles onto their faces. The defending cadets struggle to block the heavy red energy strikes, and it quickly becomes obvious these aren't just bullies because their eyes are completely glazed over. Even Nolan can tell they face high-ranking students as he parries a blow, and bigger Smythe barely holds his ground against a glowing green slash, completely overwhelmed by the massive power gap. In a total panic, he calls out for our boy to step in before they all end up as mindless drones. But our boy is already on the move, standing his ground as two masked attackers leap at him, and in a flash, he leaves them groaning on the floor. His glowing golden eyes lock onto the real threat, unleashing a massive red aura that leaves his own allies in awe as he demands to know exactly what his cousin is trying to achieve. Julius casually brushes off the hostility, claiming this is all just a gesture of goodwill. To the blonde tyrant, the academy is being dragged down by unskilled scrubs riding on the coattails of the strong. He refuses to let that kind of sloppiness tarnish the elite status of those at the top, so he's taking it upon himself to look after the scrubs the Elmheim way. But our boy couldn't care less about their twisted academy politics. Gripping his glowing red sword, he demands the Tyrant take that sick metal muzzle off his sister, and without waiting for an answer, he brings his blade crashing down toward Julius's smug face, only for the lethal strike to get absolutely denied by a glowing yellow blade. Aster is instantly forced to block, completely caught off guard as Alphen relentlessly pushes him back. Julius just smirks, claiming Alphen is standing against him completely of her own free will. Our boy stares in absolute disbelief at the masked, silent hostility radiating from the sister he swore to protect, while Lillian chimes in from behind, clearly relishing this twisted family reunion. Aster knows his mother had been sick with worry over the sudden radio silence, and the sickening reality of her captivity finally clicks into place. Refusing to accept it, he leaps back into the fray, clashing his red aura against her glowing yellow blade as he desperately promises to save her. But Alphen simply swings her sword with blank precision, releasing a massive energy arc that blasts him backward. Before Aster can even recover from the blast, an angry voice yells out from behind him, and Nolan steps into the fray, his yellow sword glowing as he declares he'll take Julius down himself. The blonde Tyrant just stays seated to casually insult the silver-haired cadet's pride as a knight. Furious, Nolan challenges him to draw his weapon and lunges forward to carve his family's proud sword style right into Elmheim flesh. But Julius doesn't even flinch. He just catches the glowing blade with his bare hand. He stands up to tower over the completely shocked teen as his grip erupts into a terrifying fiery aura, and the flames travel straight down the steel to severely burn Nolan's arm. Julius just laughs like a maniac, declaring that raw strength is the only thing that matters, before delivering a brutal kick that sends the silver-haired teen flying backward into the fire. Smythe rushes forward in a panic to check on his fallen comrade, but Nolan is already completely out of the fight, groaning in agony from the severe burns. As the veteran winces at the gruesome sight, a sadistic voice cuts through the tension to taunt their helplessness. Lillian steps up and dangles a metal muzzle, offering to make a special exception and keep the injured swordsman as a pet, though she flashes a twisted smile and quickly adds that she has no use for the bearded guy himself. Julius stands tall beside her, mocking their lack of power as a pathetic sin that strips them of any right to speak. Julius turns his attention back to Aster, taunting our boy for trying to gather such a pathetic crew of allies. As his masked seniors violently pin the defending cadets to the floor, he lays out the Elmheim philosophy that no matter what path they choose, the weak will always be swallowed by the strong. He drops the word cousin one last time, earning a fierce glowing glare from our hero, who screams his name and launches himself forward, bringing his red energy sword down with immense force. The strike triggers a massive explosion, but as the dust settles, Julius is just smiling, completely unfazed, effortlessly blocking the attack and leaving Aster straining against the hold with his eyes flaring yellow. But before our boy can counter, a pale hand shoots out and snatches him by the throat, and Julius channels his magic straight into the grip, engulfing Aster in roaring flames. Smythe watches helplessly and screams his boss's name in terror, while the blonde Tyrant just looks down in disappointment, mocking the legendary power of the 7 wings. Aster's eyes flutter shut as the fiery grip threatens to consume him, but his hold on his sword never wavers, and he calmly warns his cousin not to get so carried away just because he managed to block a single strike. In a flash, our boy breaks free, leaping into the air to unleash a massive swirling vortex of red energy, and Julius looks up in absolute shock, realizing the strike is actually rotating. The horrifying truth dawning on him that Aster is absorbing his own magic and throwing it right back. He can only brace himself as the stolen energy flares brightly before his eyes, before Aster brings the devastating blast down, sending the Elmheim Tyrant flying across the room. Our hero lands gracefully on his feet, his black and gold sword humming with power, as he casually mentions that Julius was babbling about something earlier. But he wasn't really listening, standing over the debris with that menacing red aura still radiating from his blade. Looking down at his battered cousin, Aster casually asks him to repeat whatever it was he just said, prompting Julius to glare from the shadows and angrily spit that trash should keep their mouths shut. But my guy is completely unfazed, just touching his neck with glowing eyes as he coldly asks if that was all he had. As the dust settles from the massive blast, the brown-haired man watches in absolute awe, and up on the balcony, Lily can barely believe our hero actually landed a hit on her brother. But as the smoke clears, Julius casually sits up from the rubble, rubbing his head and complaining about being sent flying before turning around with an arrogant smirk, his open shirt revealing his glowing red wing crest completely unblemished. A bystander stammers in disbelief that the guy didn't take a single scratch, which just makes Lily smile, and she immediately starts mocking her brother, teasing him for getting tossed after talking so much trash. Julius gets defensive, gripping his dagger and muttering that even he has feelings, but his embarrassment quickly turns to pure rage, flames erupting around him as he screams Aster's name. Our guy just stands there calmly with his glowing red sword at the ready, warning the blonde that he's pushing his luck. Completely unhinged, Julius swings his blade to unleash a massive wave of fire straight at him. Aster's eyes flare yellow as he decides it's time to get straight to the point, and Julius tells him to just come at him already. Bright flames clashing against a red aura before Julius initiates the strike, his fiery blade humming through the air. Our boy lunges forward to meet him head-on, but right before their blades can connect, someone steps between them and instantly halts the clash. The flames part to reveal Count Maze standing calmly in the ruined dining hall, casually scolding them for the mess as the academy director steps up right behind him with her guards and declares she has no choice but to intervene. Julius glares at Maze and aggressively tells the lackey of the Six to back off, but the Count just smiles patronizingly, pointing out that going all out against an inferior opponent would completely ruin his reputation as a top-tier valedictorian candidate. The Count politely asks the raging blonde to sheath his weapon, effortlessly de-escalating the tension, and Julius just clicks his tongue, visibly annoyed that Maze completely killed his murder spree mood. But he reluctantly lowers his flaming blade, deciding to let the disrespect slide just this once, before turning to his masked entourage and announcing that their little welcoming party is officially over. Our boy immediately steps forward to stop them, shouting for the Tyrant to wait. But Maze places a firm hand on his shoulder, interrupting the hero to ask him for a favor instead. Grounded in place, Aster is forced to watch helplessly as a pink-haired masked girl is escorted right past him, until a desperate shout from a nearby noble calling for his sister causes the captive to freeze in her tracks. She slowly turns her head, her dead eyes locking onto the crowd, and our hero stares intently at that familiar reddish-pink hair as the metal restraint slips from her face and clatters onto the stone floor. Aster looks down at the discarded muzzle, his heart sinking as he realizes Alphen is already completely under Julius's control. A short time later, Aster and his crew regroup in a private study, where Smythe slams his fist in frustration over how dangerous Julius is, especially since Nolan was severely injured in the clash and is now lying completely unconscious. The veteran bully recounts how several of their friends were dragged away and forced into those twisted metal masks. Desperate, Smythe looks to Aster to ask what their next move is, but our boy's glare is fixed entirely on Count Maze, coldly blaming the noble for not stopping Julius when he had the chance. The academy director immediately snaps at the cadet for the disrespect, but Maze just waves her off, flashing a smug smile and claiming that he and Aster are old friends. He looks to the teen for confirmation, but my guy remains dead serious. Years ago, back at the main house, Maze was the only noble under the Elmheim banner who actually took his side. Our boy knows Count Maze saved his neck back then, but looking at him now, he can't tell if the man is a friend or a foe. A thought interrupted when Smythe suddenly realizes the brown-haired woman is the academy director, demanding to know if she is really going to let Elmheim's tyranny slide. Maze just chuckles, revealing that he's actually an Elmheim executive himself and has no intention of questioning the head of house's actions. And when Aster grips one of the discarded masks to furiously ask if forcing mind control devices on students doesn't count as a serious issue, the Count callously defends the practice, stating that as a merit-based academy, any method that forces a candidate to grow is perfectly acceptable. He points out that the cadets under Julius are ranking up incredibly fast, and even Principal Mimir approves of the brutal results. Disgusted by the deep-rooted corruption, our hero turns his back on them, muttering that he can't rely on anyone in this place. As he heads for the door, Maze warns him against trying to rescue his friends alone. The executive ominously reveals that the main house is monitoring Aster's every single move. Our boy pauses, fully aware of the crushing power the Elmheim institution holds over them, but his resolve doesn't waver for a second. Staring at the metal collar in his hand, he admits this isn't about some grand sense of justice. It's the sickening reality that these iron shackles completely rot the human heart, stripping away a person's freedom, speech, and dignity until their will to resist is dead. He knows the true horror of these masks is how they turn living people into obedient, convenient tools. Maze narrows his eyes, noting that Aster sounds like he's seen this exact nightmare firsthand. But the teen cryptically replies that he just knows the tragic fate of those who wait too long to act, and he refuses to let his friends suffer that same end. The Count stares at him, a sudden suspicion crossing his mind about who this kid truly is, before Aster cuts his thoughts short, telling the noble not to worry about it. Turning back around, he admits he isn't keen on getting expelled out of the blue either, so a peaceful resolution would be best. Intrigued, Maze leans forward and asks if he actually has a plan. Our boy just holds up one of those twisted metal masks, a menacing smirk spreading across his face, and locks those glowing yellow eyes on the Count, asking if he remembers exactly how he fights. 3 days after Aster confidently held up that mind control mask, The academy cadets are being pushed to their absolute physical limits, with Bigger Smythe jogging alongside Christopher Nolan to ask if he's really okay to train with his fresh injuries. The blonde swordsman refuses to rest, determined to be ready for the grueling 4th grade curriculum, and brushes off his wounds as mere scratches, while his competitive spirit burns brighter than ever. Though across the training grounds, observers watching a lone figure casually toss masked enemies aside can't help but wonder what on earth is going through our boy's head. In his previous life, Ash finds himself held at knife point in a dimly lit room, ambushed by his silver-haired cousin, a man who still harbors a bitter, violent grudge. 3 days ago, in Julius's quarters, our hero doesn't fight his way through the door, so the blonde tyrant, lounging with his masked guards, suspiciously asks what he's plotting by showing up peacefully, surrounded by drawn blades. Aster calmly lays out his terms, demanding Alphen and his classmates back, and tosses an iron shackle to the floor, offering to wear it himself. Hidden behind her own metal mask, his sister reels in pure shock at the suicidal trade, while Julius calculates the political weight of the deal, realizing that collaring a suspected rebel is a massive win, and Lillian just laughs, asking if the kid is a masochist begging to be their pet. Julius knows his mother, the academy director, would be absolutely thrilled to have Elmheim's biggest rebel neutralized, but he still leans in, red eyes glowing with intense suspicion, certain our boy isn't the type to just roll over and submit. Aster remains completely unfazed by the blades at his neck, calmly denying any hidden agenda. He points out that the mask is locked by magic, giving his captor the power to kill him at any given second, then leans forward with a sinister smile to taunt his cousin, asking if he's really still not confident he can tame him. The provocation hits its mark, and Julius angrily shatters his wine bottle with a furious grip. Gritting his teeth, Julius accepts the deal, but decides a simple exchange is way too kind for the boy who just insulted him. Revealing his glowing chest crest, he drops a sadistic condition, demanding our hero survive 10 full days without food or water while locked in the heavy collar. Alphen desperately tries to warn him off the guaranteed death sentence, but Aster just kneels and accepts, knowing all too well how the iron shackles rot a person's heart. He looks toward his sister, his resolve hardening as he prepares for hell. A memory flashes of the Alphen from their childhood, a lively kid who always acts tough, but he knows she is just a fragile girl hiding behind a brave face to protect herself. Seeing her standing there now, completely broken and unable to even defy her captors, fuels our boy's quiet rage, and he makes a silent vow to shatter those restraints no matter what it takes. The brutal reality of Elmheim's regime is in full swing, with the masked captives forced through grueling push-ups without a single second to rest. Grion sweats profusely under his metal muzzle, internally cursing his humiliating fate, while Bigger Smythe watches from the sidelines in horror, terrified the prisoners will drop dead before Aster can even make a move. The silver-haired young man next to him coldly notes that Grion brought this hell entirely on himself, but Smythe is way more bewildered by our hero, who has gone days without a drop of food or water, yet remains perfectly fine. Our boy just keeps running laps across the barren training grounds, displaying stamina that borders on downright monstrous. And though Nolan points out that a normal human can only survive 3 or 4 days without a drop to drink, stretching that to a week only if they stay completely motionless in the dark, Aster is out here blocking heavy sword strikes and hauling logs through waist-deep water like it's nothing, prompting the silver-haired young man to bring up an old piece of gossip to explain the anomaly. He recounts the tale of an infant who crawled kilometers through deep mountain snow completely on his own. Smythe is absolutely floored, realizing Aster's life force has always been this unnatural, but our hero just flares his red aura and brushes the story off as a boring rumor. Meanwhile, deep in the Elmheim dungeon, heavy footsteps echo toward a group of huddled captives as Lillian arrives with her masked guards to cruelly announce feeding time for the rats. With a sharp snap of her fingers, she orders the grunts to pass out the rations, leaving the broken prisoners, marked with glowing purple magic, barely able to lift their heads. Their entire meal consists of a single sliver of cheese and a tiny cup of water, and a gaunt, dark-haired man stares at the pathetic spread in absolute despair, knowing he'll starve to death at this rate. A blonde captive desperately begs Lillian for just a bite of decent food, but the tyrant answers by violently stomping her boot right into his plate. She grinds the meager meal into the dirt, mockingly stating that he should have just spoken up if he didn't want it. Leaning in with a condescending smirk, she tells the starving man not to be so wasteful, especially since a certain black-haired boy is going through much harder times right now. Meanwhile, up in Julius's dining room, the blonde tyrant cuts into a fresh steak, casually asking a downcast Alphen why she doesn't go cheer her brother up. He flashes a malicious smile, twisting the knife by reminding her that our boy is starving to death entirely because of her. And Alphen can only grit her teeth in silent frustration as he laughs. Bound by her metal collar, she sits helplessly on the floor, completely unsure of what to do. But internally, Julius is actually growing suspicious over why Aster hasn't tried to escape. He expected a desperate breakout, yet the captive hasn't shown a single ounce of resistance. Piercing another piece of raw meat, Julius wonders if his victim really plans to just sit there and endure the full 10 days. With a sinister glare, he decides to kick back and watch the boy's pride crumble. But what the tyrant doesn't know is that down in the pitch-black shadows, our hero is simply biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Because while Julius assumes his victim is just rotting in a cell, the reality of Aster's punishment is far more active, with the academy instructors teaching that mana is incredibly flexible. It can act as legs to outrun a horse, or eyes to anticipate an enemy's movements. And out in the brutal training grounds known as Ironlead, our boy is putting that theory to the test. When two masked seniors lunge at him, he doesn't just dodge, he unleashes a massive red whirlwind. The sudden blast catches the attackers completely off guard and traps them inside the eye of the vortex. Before the grunts can even track his movements, Aster leaps high into the canopy. A devastating red energy strike crashes through the trees, and Aster crushes his opponent into the dirt with a heavy downward blow. A memory shows the instructor explaining that this brutal hand-to-hand combat is the core of the 4th grade curriculum, where swords are strictly prohibited. Instead, the cadets are expected to master their crests, demonstrated as a yellow beam pierces a bird mid-flight, learning how to kill without ever touching a blade. Standing victorious over the masked attacker, our boy lets out a heavy breath. It's been exactly 7 days since his hellish starvation deal began, and while he's finally getting the hang of raw mana manipulation, the clock is ticking down to those final 3 days. If he can just hold out a little longer, Alphen and the rest of the captives will walk free. But as he sits in the dirt, he knows that just playing defense isn't going to be enough. A memory flashes of Julius engulfed in flames, grabbing a victim by the collar to show off the terrifying power he wields even unarmed. With 1st grade monsters like Julius waiting for him, our boy knows he can't afford to stall out here, so even completely starved and running on fumes, he desperately searches for a way to close the massive power gap, until his vision suddenly blurs and a sickening distortion ripples right through his body. The world spins out of control, sending the exhausted teen collapsing face first into the dirt, where he lies completely helpless as a set of footsteps approaches. A pale hand reaches down to check his temperature, noting a severe fever, and Aster immediately recognizes the voice. It's Christopher Nolan, who casually reveals that Count Maze gave him the annoying task of stepping in if the stubborn kid was about to drop dead. A brief cutaway shows the Count himself, while Aster wonders why the Earl would intervene. Seeing our boy's pathetic state, Nolan turns to grab his sword and offers to smash the iron muzzle off right now. But before he can take a single step, Aster weakly grabs his arm. The blonde teen looks back in confusion, grabbing Aster's wrist to restrain him while warning the idiot that he's literally going to die if he keeps this up. But our hero's yellow eyes flare with desperate resolve, because if he breaks the deal now, Alphen is doomed. Nolan can't understand a damn word through the metal, but he respects the stubborn refusal to back down, pointing out that their enemies aren't going to play fair. Just as a swarm of masked seniors with glowing red eyes emerges from the shadows and Lillian Elmheim's mocking voice cuts through the trees. Lillian steps into the clearing, taunting our boy's pale, half-dead appearance, and as Aster glares up at his tormentor, Nolan demands to know why she's crashing a 4th grade training session. The purple-haired woman just smirks, claiming the boys simply wanted to show off for her, and that the instructors fully sanctioned this little ambush as a class visit. She leaps up to a high branch to look down at her prey, sadistically declaring that she only came to watch him cry and beg for mercy before she settles into her seat and tells the grunts to carry on like she isn't even there. She cheerfully orders the grunts to kill the cadets to their heart's content, and as the masked seniors swarm in, Aster catches a glowing purple punch, realizing this is a blatant assassination attempt to break him before his 10 days are up. He curses himself for dragging Nolan into this mess, as the two of them stand back to back, charging their auras and frustrated by the no swords restriction, because they're completely outnumbered, and our boy knows trading blows head-on will only wear them down. His mind races, desperately searching for a low-cost trump card to break the deadlock, until he lands a heavy red strike, mocking the seniors for being nothing but common thugs without their blades. But Lillian isn't just watching from the sidelines, she fires a massive purple energy beam straight down from her branch. She smugly punishes him for trying to look cool, and the resulting blast kicks up a thick cloud of debris that leaves Aster struggling just to stay on his feet. Nolan screams a desperate warning as a massive bald senior radiating a heavy purple aura charges in at blinding speed, giving our boy absolutely no time to dodge as he braces for the hit. The brute violently slams him into the dirt with a sickening shockwave, and blood erupts from Aster's mouth right through his metal muzzle, before the sheer force of the impact launches him backward to smash straight through a wooden barricade. Nolan watches in absolute horror as his ally hits the dirt in a pool of blood, while Lillian calls down from her perch to keep him alive as a broken pet. One of the masked goons brutally yanks our hero up by his hair to finish the job, but right as they prepare to beat him within an inch of his life, his glove begins to crackle with intense red energy. His glowing yellow eyes flare as he finally finds his opening, and he unleashes a devastating swirling slash of red magic that rips through the air. Lillian's sadistic smile immediately vanishes into pure shock. Aster tears through the ambush with a massive red vortex, glaring through his blood-stained mask as he prepares to slaughter every last one of them. The moment the blue-haired senior lays a hand on our boy, a defensive burst of red magic violently slashes his arm, sending the attacker reeling in shock as he realizes the energy traveled straight up his limb. Aster slowly rises to his feet with his aura flaring into a menacing intensity, and while a bald senior tries to analyze this strange new defense, another attacker in a dark tunic refuses to back down and leaps from above for a crushing downward strike. But my guy just calmly raises a single hand and effortlessly catches the full-force punch, stopping the senior dead in his tracks. Without a single word, our hero grips the man's face and unleashes a brutal, point-blank blast of red energy, and the senior hits the forest floor in a bleeding heap. Watching from a distance, Lillian is completely stunned, noting aloud that a fourth-class cadet is already using attribute alteration. But as the rest of the masked squad swarms him with glowing purple strikes, and one of the men notes aloud that Aster's magic is fundamentally superior to their basic enhancement skills, he unleashes a massive circular red slash that effortlessly sweeps the attackers away, forcing one of the survivors to cower behind a tree and compare this terrifying power to his brother's fire magic. But instead of just burning everything to ash, Aster swings his arm to unleash a massive red slash that effortlessly severs a giant tree into pieces. The masked onlookers stand paralyzed in awe, noting aloud that it's a highly advanced technique, before our hero blitzes through the remaining enemies and knocks them back with a rapid flurry of crimson strikes. He cuts them down until they hit the dirt, and the terrified observers cry out that there is no mistaking it. This guy has evolved into a monster fully capable of killing, with just his magic. Nolan catches his breath nearby, watching the carnage as he admits aloud that the Seven Wings boy is still one step ahead of him. But the fight isn't over, as Lillian lightly touches down, playfully clapping at their flashy display. She smugly points out that despite all that power, they haven't actually killed a single person. Drawing her sword, she warns the boys that her mind-controlled soldiers won't stay down for long, and her blade erupts with a purple aura as she aggressively barks at the fallen men to get back on their feet. Nolan curses her under his breath, while our hero remains completely silent. Suddenly, a metal collar sparks on one of the downed seniors, and right in front of Lillian, the mask straight up shatters off the gray-haired guy's face, but instead of him lunging to attack, she looks on in confusion. The freed man just stares at his bare hands, asking in disbelief why the mask came off, before a wave of relief washes over him, and he thanks God for his first real breath of fresh air. Nolan looks over at Aster in shock, muttering to him as he finally pieces the strategy together. A memory shows our boy intentionally taking that brutal slash across the chest earlier in the fight just to shatter the mind control masks. Unfazed, Lillian sadistically explains that once she feeds the captives, they'll put the muzzles right back on themselves, and one of her subordinates tells Aster his attempt to play hero was completely useless. Furious at the delay, the purple-haired woman screams at her men to attack, but the uniformed seniors just stand there in nervous hesitation. Lillian stammers in shock as they blatantly disobey her direct order, before the silver-haired candidate steps forward to point out that their true natures aren't so rotten now that their shackles are broken. He confidently challenges her to fight them herself, and the tyrant just clicks her tongue with a hostile glare. The silver-haired cadet catches Aster staring a hole through him, and exasperated by the silence, comedically offers to be his translator. But Lillian cuts the moment short. She floats above our hero and scoffs at his ridiculous restraint. She mocks him for diligently enduring the muzzle when he clearly had the raw power to shatter it himself, and flashes a menacing smile, warning him that playing the well-behaved victim is eventually going to cost him dearly. Standing alone in the clearing, Aster just sighs, quietly saying that he can't break his word, not when he refuses to do anything he couldn't proudly boast about to his adoptive father. But suddenly a sharp spike of pain pierces our hero's skull, making him gasp, and the silver-haired cadet yells out in alarm as the boy begins to stagger. 7 brutal days of starvation finally take their toll, and Aster curses as he pitches forward. But before he hits the dirt, Alphen breaks through the chaos to catch him. Running on exactly 1 HP, he weakly mumbles her name in a delirious daze, prompting Alphen to look down at her reckless brother with deep sorrow. A crushing wave of guilt washes over her, and she apologizes aloud for always being the one who needs saving. As our boy's system finally crashes, his fever-cooked brain hallucinates Alphen pulling him into a tight embrace, softly reassuring him that he gave her the courage she needed to finally stand on her own. Sometime later, a sudden frantic shout echoes through a dimly lit infirmary, snapping Aster awake in a cold sweat. He scans the quiet room, wondering aloud if the scream was just another lingering fever dream, until a folded piece of paper suddenly flutters down onto the sheets. Our boy reaches out to grab the mysterious note, but the second he reads the contents, his glowing eyes widen in absolute horror. He crushes the paper in his fist as a voice off-screen stammers that dreaded name, leaving us on a massive cliffhanger because the one final boss he actually fears just entered the chat. Our boy sprints down the dimly lit hallway in a dead panic, but skids to a halt when a voice calls out his name, and Count Maze steps up to remind him he's in no condition to be out of bed, before the noble's eyes drop to a crumpled piece of paper left on the floor. The Count picks it up, scanning the handwritten text to find a desperate apology from Alphen for being such a burden. Earlier today, the red-haired woman sits at her desk in that heavy metal muzzle, writing out her resolve to finally be the one to save him, just like he protected her back at the sword dance gathering. Aster tears across the academy grounds, cursing himself for taking the Iron Shackles deal if it was only going to push his sister to do something reckless. He closes in on the heavy double doors and shoves them wide open, desperate to stop her before it's too late, only to freeze in absolute horror at the sight waiting inside. Our boy bursts into the room with a desperate scream, but Lillian just casually yawns at the intrusion, complaining about his lack of manners as Aster drops to the floor and pulls his battered sister into his arms. Lillian sadistically recounts how Alphen came begging for his freedom, mocking how the usually timid girl suddenly crawled back with a look of fierce determination. She smiles, admitting she beat the girl half to death simply because she was annoyed, and a guttural roar of rage tears from our guy's throat. The Tyrant just gloats that the torture was the perfect stress relief, while the realization claws at Aster that he was way too naive. He glares at the smirking siblings knowing he never should have made that starvation deal, and curses himself for not just tearing the place apart before Alphen had to do something so reckless. Years ago, Viscount Highfried sat him down for a harsh lesson on patience, drilling into him that a knight's duty meant swallowing their pride. He taught Aster and Alphen that protecting their mission was the true reality of being a knight, and warned that even if they were spat on or beaten to a pulp, they had to endure it without lashing out. When Aster asked if they were just supposed to let people walk all over them, the old man shook his head, explaining that miscalculating the timing was the real danger. He challenged our boy to figure out exactly what he was fighting for, so that when the true moment finally arrived, Aster could draw his blade without a single ounce of hesitation, cradling his battered sister. Our boy realizes his attempt at playing nice was a massive mistake, and as Lillian flinches at a sudden blur tearing across the room, a stray blade hurtles straight for his back. But Aster doesn't even blink. He just reaches out and catches the razor-sharp steel barehanded before violently driving the tip straight into the floor tiles, triggering a massive blinding shockwave of pure golden magic that completely engulfs the room. The sheer force of the blast sends Lillian reeling, while Julius just stands his ground, silently watching the golden aura flare to life. Standing at the epicenter of the storm, Aster's patience is officially gone, and with his eyes glowing a terrifying radioactive yellow, he issues a bone-chilling vow to wipe out the entire family tree. He screams his intent to slaughter every last one of them, but before he can completely lose himself to the rage, Alphen weakly opens her eyes and begs him to stop. Across the academy grounds, the sheer weight of his unleashed magic sends shockwaves through the student body, catching the attention of a pink-haired woman who stares out her window in disbelief, her eyes narrowing as she recognizes the terrifying signature. Outside, an older academy official stands frozen in the night, while Count Maze breaks into a cold sweat, realizing that our boy has finally snapped. He stares up at the erupting building, screaming Aster's name as the golden light shatters the sky. Our hero slams his sword into the floor, radiating pure golden heat. Without a second of hesitation, he swings his blade straight for Lillian's neck, sending the purple-haired tyrant scrambling backward in absolute terror, but just before the killing blow connects, Aster's glowing eyes dart toward a sudden flash of movement, and he instantly pivots to block a massive, fiery sword strike from Julius Elmheim. Lillian cries out for her big brother, while the blonde psycho just grins through the flames, thrilled to finally face the legendary Seven Wings. Julius scoffs, genuinely impressed that our boy can still output this kind of pressure while practically starving to death. But he casually gestures to the unconscious cadets on the floor, taunting him for enduring all that torture just to save a bunch of weaklings, and Aster answers by launching himself straight at the blonde tyrant. The two blur into a high-speed clash of fire and golden magic, with our hero getting knocked backward into the air, screaming his abuser's name. Julius just smirks, winding up his flaming blade as he admits he's been waiting for this exact opportunity. Julius brings the fire down in a lethal strike, but Aster blocks the blow and sets off a massive fiery shockwave. The sadistic brother laughs like a maniac through the blast, promising to burn him until there's absolutely nothing left. But my guy just glares back through the inferno, his golden eyes flaring as he fully unleashes his monstrous power. The resulting clash between our boy and Julius triggers a massive explosion of yellow and red energy that shakes the entire grand hall, sending the mind-controlled guards scrambling for their lives to avoid the crossfire. Watching from the sidelines, Lillian is absolutely stunned that this muzzled captive can throw hands on par with her brother. Aster drops into a low stance as his golden aura flares wildly, which makes the masked man realize just how much the kid was holding back during their own duel. And then the two monsters collide again in a devastating shockwave. The sheer force of the blast knocks Alphen right off her feet, but Julius ignores her to furiously swing his blade downward, completely baffled as to why our guy suddenly stopped giving a damn about his own sister, making Julius realize that the kid isn't even paying attention to his own sister anymore. And the blonde tyrant glares at the incoming blur as he wonders what the hell is driving him so hard. Aster just leaps through the air, his mind consumed by a single murderous goal, muttering a dark command to wipe out the entire Elmheim bloodline. The masked teen hits the dirt in a crouch, screaming in agony as volatile yellow energy swirls around him, and Julius recognizes the stance. Figuring the kid is trying to disrupt his magic again, refusing to give him the chance, the sadistic blonde rushes in with his glowing sword to shut it down, right as Lillian frantically screams for her brother to watch out. But it's too late. Our boy unleashes a massive ground-tearing golden energy slash, and Julius's eyes widen in pure shock right before the devastating wave completely engulfs the blonde tyrant. As the flames wash over him, he realizes something terrifying about this magic. It isn't just burning his skin, but physically slicing through his clothes and traveling right up his chest, just before a massive explosion detonates and swallows him in a fiery inferno. Debris and golden streaks tear through the grand hall, but as the smoke clears, Julius is still standing, his shirt shredded but his body completely intact. He just smirks, admitting that raw slashing magic is incredibly rare and actually came close to killing him, warning the kid that his own magic isn't just hot. As he takes a step forward with flames swirling around his boots and promises that his own power is hot enough to kill. The overwhelming heat blasts against our boy's mask, making him flinch as he realizes that just standing near the tyrant is enough to make anyone lose the will to fight back. The sheer intensity of it makes our hero admit that true strength forces anyone who defies it to feel like they're in the wrong. Even as he struggles to breathe in the blinding heat, our hero mutters that such overwhelming power only matters if you're actually the last one standing. Julius just laughs at the defiance, mocking the kid's futile struggle, and with a vicious roar he unleashes a massive wave of red and yellow fire. The attack slams right into Aster, slicing deep into his flesh and sending blood splattering across the floor. Watching the brutal exchange from the sidelines, Lillian is actually horrified by the boy's self-destructive fighting style, and a battered Alphen can only lie on the ground, weakly calling out her brother's name. 7 years ago, there was only one other time Aster pushed his body into this kind of self-destructive state, when his golden magic went completely out of control and triggered a massive explosion. Their adoptive father had to risk his own life just to stop the boy's rampage. And ever since that day, Aster distanced himself from the family, unable to forgive himself for the incident, truly believing that his own weakness was what ended up hurting the people he loved. Aster screams his lungs out as he violently clashes blades with Julius, leaving Alphen to watch helplessly from the floor. She wonders why he always has to turn all the blame onto himself, gasping in horror, as her brother takes a brutal strike from the tyrant and crashes hard onto the wooden planks. Julius stands over his defeated prey, mockingly praising his stubbornness, before telling the kid to just die already. But mid-sentence, Julius suddenly drops his weapon in complete disbelief, his red eyes widening in shock as his body abruptly erupts in a spray of cross-shaped bloody lacerations. Confused and in agonizing pain, the tyrant realizes he can't even put strength into his arms, and at that exact same moment, our boy takes the identical delayed damage, causing his metal muzzle to spark before it completely shatters into pieces with a sharp crack. Free from the restraint, Aster rises to his feet with blood dripping from his mouth, his golden aura exploding as he screams the Elmheim name. Julius sweats in terror, realizing this monster is still coming for him, and with murderous intent, our hero lunges at the tyrant to finish the fight. Without a second of hesitation, our boy charges forward in a burst of explosive golden energy, and Julius braces himself to take the impact. Ash closes the distance in a flash and thrusts a lethal strike toward the tyrant. But before the blow can land, Alphen cries out for him to stop. She throws herself onto his back, hugging him tightly even as his crackling magic burns her. Aster snaps out of his murderous trance, and his glowing eye widens in recognition. Alphen grits her teeth against the fierce heat of his aura, just to hold him back, and horror washes over our hero when he realizes he was about to hurt the very person he swore to protect. He desperately tries to choke back the surging golden energy, terrified his own power is going to consume her, until a sudden shout cuts through the chaos. Count Maze bursts through the doorway, forcefully hurling a heavy object across the room, and our boy looks up just in time to see the magic sword Graham flying straight at him. He snatches the hilt out of the air and instantly funnels his overflowing magic into the weapon, planting his feet in front of Alphen to tank the absolute mother of all magical backlashes. The sheer force of the blow pushes his already battered frame to its absolute breaking point. He staggers backward under a spray of fresh blood, but his sister catches his fall, screaming his name. She wraps her arms around him, overwhelmed with relief that he survived the blast. But our boy weakly scolds her for throwing herself into the crossfire. He glances down at Graham and realizes the magic-devouring blade is the only thing that kept his own power from tearing him apart. Count Maze approaches the battered siblings with a completely drained expression, before a mocking voice cuts through the dust to taunt him for ruining the mood. Julius steps out of the smoke, his bare chest covered in glowing red scars. The Tyrant arrogantly declares that even with his injuries, he can still easily slaughter them all, and a terrifying fiery aura erupts around him to prove the point. But the execution is cut short by the sharp clack of heels, as Helen Elmheim marches into the room with her guards. The Duchess glares down at our battered boy coldly, addressing him by his full name, and immediately orders her men to restrain him, leaving Alphen completely shocked. The armored soldiers violently tackle the exhausted teen to the ground, pinning him before he can even think about resisting. Julius furiously confronts his mother, demanding to know what she thinks she's doing, interrupting his kill. But Helen completely ignores him, standing over Aster to accuse him of slashing 10 unarmed candidates during training. She condemns the despicable act, stating the Academy will not let it slide, which prompts Alphen to immediately speak up, knowing her brother would never pull something so cowardly. But the guards just keep our boy pinned to the floor, and he realizes Liliane must have set this whole frame up in motion. Helen uses the completely trashed room as proof of his mindless rampage, framing the terrified masked seniors as innocent victims of his uncontrollable 7 wings. The Duchess coldly reprimands him for disgracing the Elmheim name and orders him to pack his bags before his official expulsion hearing tomorrow. The brutal verdict leaves Alphen absolutely devastated, while Count Maze mutters from the sidelines with deep regret that Aster got caught despite his warnings, admitting that stepping in to save the boy now would ruin his own position, even though he can't afford to lose him. But before the guards can drag our boy away, a massive pillar of fire erupts from nowhere, violently blasting Helen's shadowy goons across the room. The attackers are thrown backward by the sheer force of the heat as a familiar voice rings out through the smoke, mocking the Duchess, that gloating is a privilege strictly reserved for the victor. Julius steps into view, completely engulfed in flames, and warns his mother not to just waltz in and steal the credit for his fight. Helen narrows her glowing pink eyes and suspiciously demands to know what her son is playing at. But the blonde Tyrant just scoffs, explaining that if Aster gets expelled right now, it'll look like he ran crying to mommy after taking an L. He declares that such a rumor would be a true disgrace to their family name, so he fully intends to kill Aster properly with his own 2 hands. Angered by this blatant defiance, Helen glares at him and coldly compares him to his much more obedient brother, Patrick, but Julius aggressively barks right back to remind her that his status as a direct descendant actually outranks a mere duchess. The sudden disrespect leaves the matriarch dead silent, her eyes narrowing in tense anger, turning her back on her arrogant son. She coldly tells him to prove his big words through actual results next time, before walking right past our battered hero and cruelly stating that she will never acknowledge him or his impossible 7 wings. As the Duchess leaves, our battered hero turns his focus back to Julius, watching the blonde Tyrant step up right beside him before demanding to know what happens to their starvation deal and Alphen's freedom. Looking back over his shoulder, Julius scoffs that the agreement is completely void, admitting that against a monster who can shatter the iron shackles through sheer brute force, the mind control collars are now worse than useless, leaving him to angrily tell the teen to do whatever the hell he wants. All around them, the heavy metal restraints on the captive workers snap open and burst into flames. But the Tyrant doesn't even care that his small fry are escaping. He simply walks away into the dark, promising to settle their score later, and warning Aster to tame those 7 wings before they meet again. The dust finally settles on that remarkably intense night, and a few days later, our hero returns to the cadet hall, where Bigger Smythe and his loyal supporters enthusiastically swarm him. They buzz with excitement over his rampage, calling him boss as they check on his injuries, but Ash humbly asks them to drop the title, convinced he didn't actually do enough. A brief memory of his desperate sword swings flashes before him, bringing a heavy wave of regret that he almost failed to save everyone. Smythe just smiles and brushes off the self-deprecation, pointing out that every single cadet snatched up by Julius made it back in one piece, and it's all thanks to our boy throwing down. But our boy is still haunted by the image of Julius's scarred back, bitterly aware that he only survived on his enemy's whim. Standing alone in a stone room, our boy clenches his fist, frustrated that the bearer of the 7 wings could be reduced to such a pathetic state, until Smythe suddenly slaps him on the back, snapping him out of the dark spiral. The bearded veteran leans in with a reassuring smile, reminding him that everyone knows he charged into enemy territory and put his life on the line for their sake, pointing out that Aster is only 14 years old and not a single one of them would ever lose respect for him over this. The rest of the cadets smile warmly, echoing the veteran's unwavering support, leaving our hero genuinely touched by their absolute loyalty. Shifting the conversation, Smythe leans in close and asks about Alphen, noting that the siblings finally have some alone time together. Aster hesitates, his expression turning awkward as he pictures her turning away from him, admitting that they haven't spoken a single word to each other since the rescue. Looking back at how they've been avoiding each other, he realizes that mutual guilt is the true root of the awkward distance between them. Staring at the ceiling, he lets out a heavy sigh, feeling just as trapped as when he was wearing the muzzle, until a soft knock at the door interrupts his brooding. Our hero calls out that it's unlocked and his eyes widen in surprise as the handle turns, revealing Alphen standing there nervously, asking if they can finally clear the air. Stepping out into the fresh air, Alphen stretches her arms, basking in the feeling of finally being able to breathe freely. She turns to our boy with a warm smile, thanking him for coming to her rescue, but Aster just rubs the back of his neck, awkwardly downplaying the whole hero act. Alphen playfully calls out his stubbornness before her expression drops, admitting she actually wanted him to leave her alone. A memory shows her lying defeated on the floor, and she confesses she just didn't want her little brother to see her in such a pathetic state. Still, she manages a smile, pointing out that this makes twice he's saved her life, and brings up a harsh lesson their uncle dropped at the sword dance gathering years ago. An image plays out of the imposing older man standing over a beaten fighter, declaring that anyone who can't avenge themselves has no right to wield a sword, words that had eaten away at her ever since. Gripping her hilt, she admits it drove her to get stronger so she wouldn't have to rely on Aster's protection. But in the end, she still fell short. Alphen adds that stepping into the Night Academy only served as a brutal reminder of her own weakness, as a brief vision shows her crumpled at the feet of Lillian and Julius. Walking beside him, she confesses her recent reckless stunt was just a desperate attempt to look cool in front of her little brother, and she beats herself up for being a pathetic older sister who only ever causes trouble. But our hero looks right back at her and sincerely states that physical power isn't the only measure of worth. He brings up his own arrogant past, and points out that whenever he was about to go down the wrong path, she was always the one there to pull him back. Touched by the heartfelt confession, Alphen softly calls his name as Aster humbly admits that this whole ordeal proved he still has a long way to go. He extends a hand and formally asks for her strength, prompting Alphen to ask if he's really inviting her to join his anti-Elmheim rebellion, and he appeals straight to her own desire for revenge against the twisted family that tormented them. Alphen silently weighs the dangerous offer, then finally breaks the tension with a sigh, pointing out that he hasn't changed a bit since they were kids. She admits she doesn't fully understand the depths of his burning hatred for the family, but she declares she's completely done, turning a blind eye to their tyranny. Aster listens quietly as she points out that he's still way too reckless for his own good. With a warm smile, Alphen promises to stay by his side and keep an eye on him, and Aster confidently replies that he knew she would say that. Walking back together, our hero officially welcomes his sister back to the fold. Later, in a large academy hall, Aster stands before his gathered supporters to formally introduce Alphen to the faction, and she politely greets the room before our hero quickly lays down the law and demands they treat the third-class upperclassmen with absolute respect. Bigger Smythe immediately ignores the memo. He drops to one knee to kiss her hand and smoothly introduces himself as her little brother's absolute best friend. In a flash, Aster violently crushes the guy's wrist, dropping the flirt to the floor in a fit of overprotective rage. The onlookers sweat nervously and decide right then and there to keep a safe distance from the boss's sister, while Alphen looks around the room, genuinely surprised by the diverse crowd our hero has gathered, especially when she spots their blonde cousin standing among them. The guy nervously stammers that he's just here to repay Aster for breaking his iron shackles. But the silver-haired teen instantly calls his bluff and exposes that his mother actually ordered him to spy on the rebels. Aster doesn't even blink at the blatant espionage, calmly pointing out that if their enemies are bothering to plant a mole, they clearly aren't planning an immediate strike. A brief memory shows Aunt Helen scolding the cousin, backing up Aster's theory that the stern woman is way too preoccupied with her rebellious second son to launch an immediate attack. Christopher Nolan asks what their next move is, wondering if they're just supposed to sit quietly until graduation, but our boy confidently assures him he'll have a plan in motion long before then. Alphen isn't so sure, and she reminds the room of Lady Helen's terrifying grip on the academy. Her aunt controls the directors and instructors with an iron fist, but Aster just smiles, stating they simply need to obtain more influence than her, leaving Alphen stunned by the sheer audacity of the idea. Aster explains that Helen's power only works on those in a weaker position, so if someone with higher authority acknowledges their faction, she won't be able to touch them. Bigger Smythe anxiously points out that she's the Duke's wife, which makes her nearly untouchable. The silver-haired teen suddenly realizes the terrifying implication of Aster's words, noting that the only men at the very top of the kingdom's hierarchy are the Duke and the King, and Aster confirms it with a grin. They need the backing of the only person above the Duke. They need the absolute highest authority in the land, the one man even the Elmheim family has to bow their heads to. Meanwhile, in a massive throne room, Duke Roderick drops respectfully to one knee, looking up with glowing red eyes as he bows before the king of the Dorisil kingdom. In the opulent throne room, an unseen voice casually brings up the upcoming duel ceremony, and as a servant massages his leg, he notes that the prestigious event is fast approaching. The speaker is the king himself, who lounges among his attendants, and asks a kneeling Duke Roderick if he's raised any entertaining warriors for the show, specifically demanding to see the power of the infamous Seven Wings. Roderick hesitates and suggests he could arrange an exhibition if the boy is deemed worthy. He claims our hero is still too young and inexperienced to meet the crown's high expectations, but the king just laughs, completely dismissing the duke's concerns, since Aster's crest already outclasses the country's strongest knights. The king even reveals that whispers of a new king of knights born to replace the duke have already breached the castle walls. Roderick falls dead silent, and the monarch casually brings up our boy's habit of kicking the main house around. He pops a grape into his mouth to note the shifting political tides, well aware that anti-Elmheim sentiment is steadily growing among the kingdom's forces. If these angry dissidents manage to form an alliance with the Seven Wings, a full-scale rebellion could erupt right under their noses, so he sternly warns Roderick not to get bitten by his own dog. Because if Elmheim falls, the crown goes down with it. Roderick swallows his pride and promises to keep a tight leash on his subordinates. But the king just grimaces, clearly suspicious of the duke's humble act. Before the tension can boil over, a new voice echoes through the grand hall to assure his majesty there's absolutely no need to panic, and Patrick Elmheim steps into the light, arrogantly declaring that he's the only man truly fit to lead the royal knights. The blonde knight bows low and offers to handle all these mundane headaches so the crown can just sit back and relax, which is exactly what the king wants to hear. And he praises his loyal sword while sinking right back into his decadent lounging. Later, out in a quiet castle corridor, Patrick catches up with the Duke to report the recent chaos at the Knight Academy and pass along a message that their mother wants Roderick to step in. But Roderick shuts him down cold, firmly stating he'll handle the situation himself if it actually comes to that, before turning his back to leave the tedious babysitting to his subordinate. Left alone to stare out a massive window, Patrick scoffs at the Duke's total lack of compassion, realizing that to secure Elmheim's future, he'll eventually have to bypass the chain of command and confront our boy directly. Meanwhile, at the Knight Academy, our boy brings up the upcoming duel ceremony. Count Maze sits at his desk and confirms it's a traditional royal match, where the two best candidates of a bountiful harvest are chosen to compete right in front of the king. The massive spectacle draws a huge audience, so Maze asks why he even brought it up, and Aster intensely demands a recommendation to participate. He knows the winner receives the Medal of Honorary Knighthood directly from the crown. To our guy, it's the ultimate proof of royal recognition, and he wants it, but the Count flatly turns him down. Our hero is taken aback and demands to know why. Count Maze admits that his raw abilities and the Seven Wings prestige make him a flawless candidate on paper, but he leans in with a stern warning. If the boy loses control in front of the king, the fallout would be catastrophic. He points out that the other participant will likely be Julius, asking if he can really keep his explosive rage in check. Aster falls silent, unable to deny the massive risk. Maze suggests that if he just wants the medal, he doesn't need to fixate on the ceremony. He advises the teen to follow Kudo's path and slowly accumulate achievements through steady effort, but Aster flatly rejects the idea, insisting he doesn't have the time or the power to protect his family from Elmheim right now. A memory shows Julius keeping Alphen locked in that mind control mask, fueling his desperate need to become completely untouchable before anyone else gets hurt. Maze just chuckles at the sheer insolence of the plan. As Aster explains, this is his only chance to duel Julius one-on-one before the Tyrant graduates. He vows to stand victorious in the arena, publicly beating an Elmheim to a pulp right in front of his majesty, and refuses to let a golden opportunity like this slip away. The Count admits he still doesn't know the full scope of our hero's schemes, but he trusts the boy hasn't sworn loyalty to the main house. Suddenly, our guy swallows his pride and bows deeply, pleading for the executive to lend him his strength. Maze is stunned into silence before Aster looks up with glowing yellow eyes, begging the Count to place a bet on him just like he did in the past. Maze just smiles, deeply amused that the notoriously proud kid who defied the Duke is actually bowing to him. Standing up from his desk, the Count agrees to give him a chance out of respect for the attitude adjustment, which catches our boy completely off guard. Maze explains that the immediate issue is the Seven Wings losing control, and he promises to write the recommendation only if that risk is completely eliminated. To pull that off, Aster needs to truly understand his own monstrous power, so the teen asks if the executive is going to be his teacher. Maze just laughs the idea off, admitting he's not cut out for the job and that they need to rely on a real professional. Following the Count's directions, Aster pushes open a set of heavy double doors and steps into a colossal library with towering bookshelves that reach straight up to the ceiling. In the center of the massive room, a single book resting on a pedestal begins to emit a brilliant golden light before its pages burst into ethereal flames to reveal glowing magical runes. Principal Mimir stands right behind the magical blaze, welcoming his new student with a knowing smile, and tells him to hold on just a second, because he's about to bring out the exact person our boy has been waiting for. Principal Mimir welcomes our boy to the Academy's grand library, revealing that Count Maze has already briefed him on the situation. Aster knows the headmaster is the leading authority on wing crest research, and despite the old man's gentle grandfatherly vibe, Mimir is actually a former royal knight and an absolute master of mana manipulation. Our hero realizes there's no one better qualified to help him, so he straight up asks the headmaster how to control the volatile power of his 7 wings. Mimir smiles and assures the teen he knows exactly what to do, but his expression suddenly darkens as he admits his own intense curiosity. Before Aster can even react, the scholar lunges forward and yanks down the kid's collar to expose the massive red crest on his back. The old man completely loses his composure, geeking out over the magical lines and the unique star-shaped pattern right in front of everyone. He leans in uncomfortably close, his academic obsession taking over, and our boy jumps back in alarm before the headmaster quickly apologizes, admitting he just can't suppress his intellectual curiosity. Aster grips his glowing sword, completely exasperated by the old man's lack of composure, but Mimir confesses he's actually at a bit of a loss himself, explaining that a human harboring the 7 wings is exceedingly rare to begin with. Even in this vast library, there are only ancient myths and speculation on the subject, meaning Aster himself is likely the most knowledgeable person alive. Our guy is frustrated, wondering what he's supposed to do now if the experts are useless, but Mimir reassures him there is still one way forward. He points to a glowing book on a pedestal, stating the artifact can only be opened by someone with the crest, prompting Aster to cautiously approach the mysterious tome. The principal reminds him that wing crests were originally gifted to humanity by spirits, confirming that the mythical beings were entirely real, even if most of them have long since vanished from the world. Suddenly, a massive glowing white dragon spirit materializes right there in the library. Mimir gazes up at the magnificent creature in awe, explaining that the ancient entities determined their hierarchy by the number of wings they were born with. The lore states that the great spirits, those possessing 7 wings, wielded godlike powers, capable of controlling the weather and even reviving the dead, while a rare few could even transcend time itself. Aster's eyes widen in shock at that last detail. An image of his freezing infant self flashes on screen as our hero realizes this time-manipulating magic perfectly matches his own regression. Principal Mimir taps the tome on the desk, revealing that one of these ancient entities is actually sealed right inside its pages, and if our boy can speak with it directly, he might unlock power far beyond just controlling his crest. But the older man quickly warns that this particular spirit is incredibly short-tempered and absolutely despises humanity. Aster asks what sparked such deep hatred, and Mimir explains that the entity was brutally betrayed by the very people it trusted and crammed into this tiny prison, which makes the teen sigh, admitting he can't exactly blame the guy for holding a grudge. With no other options on the table, our hero decides to take the risk. The second his gloved hand brushes the pages, the book erupts in a blinding golden light and a blonde spirit materializes from the glare, amused that those bearing the 7 wings always seem to attract one another. Aster finds himself swallowed by the radiant aura, his own golden eyes flaring as he commands the entity to stop hiding and step forward. But his intense standoff is cut short when small strange flames suddenly begin to flicker around his face. A chaotic vision of a burning town suddenly flashes across his sight. When the blinding light finally fades, our boy finds himself standing right in the middle of the blazing streets. He looks around in total confusion at the utter devastation and the bodies littering the ground. But before he can even process the carnage, an armed soldier charges at him from behind with a war cry, forcing Aster to instantly spin around and block the heavy strike. He catches the blade, but he's completely thrown off when he realizes he's holding 2 standard-issue swords instead of Graham. And looking down, he sees he's decked out in the exact same military coat he wore back in his previous life. Before he can even process the wardrobe change, another soldier lunges at him with a glowing purple blade, forcing our guy to cross his twin swords and block the heavy strike just to stay alive. He pushes back against the clash, his mind desperately trying to make sense of the chaos. But as he stumbles backward through the burning streets, a terrifying realization hits him. His magic is completely gone. The brown-haired attacker notices him suddenly freeze up in a panic and smirks at the easy target. 3 more men charge in from behind with drawn swords, screaming that he's a traitor and a dog of Elmheim. Aster leaps into the air and throws the insult right back in their faces, cleaving through the air with a massive sweeping strike that sends the entire trio flying backward. He stands victorious over the fallen grunts, casually preparing to put down the last approaching enemy, but as he gets a closer look at the figure stepping out of the smoke, his eyes widen in absolute disbelief. But the figure in the smoke triggers a memory from his previous life that hits our guy like a flashbang, zeroing in on the distinct red tattoo stamped across the man's hand, a mark that perfectly matches the one on the severed head he found back in the pitch-black arena. The sickening realization hits Aster. This is Darius, the adoptive brother from his previous life, who steps up and immediately mocks him for being wingless. Standing in the middle of a burning town, our boy stares down the man who just mocked him. Darius, the adoptive brother from his previous life, completely thrown off by the illusion. He demands to know how his old abuser is still breathing, but Darius just flashes a sinister smile and feigns ignorance, reminding him that they're on an active battlefield. He draws his sword with a promise to add his wingless sibling to the casualty list, and Aster barely has time to process his old name before the strike comes. Their swords clash, and Darius's smug expression instantly shatters into shock as he realizes his target should be dead, panicking at the sheer pressure radiating from a supposed failure. Before Aster can press the advantage, another brother grabs Darius, warning him that their father's attack is starting. Our hero looks up to see Duke Roderick standing before a massive wall of flames, and as a terrifying burst of red and black energy erupts around the Duke, Aster realizes exactly which memory he's trapped in. Roderick raises his arm, commanding them to carve this apocalyptic sight deeply into their eyes. Years ago, the townspeople could only watch in horror as golden flames consumed their homes, a devastating showcase of the Seven Wings' true power, which rained down as a colossal beam of energy and obliterated everything in its path. Our boy was caught right in the epicenter of that massive explosion during his previous life as Ash Elmheim. It was the year the Yggdrasil kingdom was torn apart by the greatest rebellion in its history, sparked when Duke Roderick assassinated the former king and claimed the bloody throne for himself. That ruthless coup ignited a massive civil war between Elmheim and the rebel factions. The very meat grinder our guy died fighting in, and even with the entire country under his heel, the tyrant vowed the slaughter wouldn't end until every last rebel head rolled. The illusion shifts, and Aster finds himself receiving orders from Roderick to wipe out rebel remnants in the Eastern Highlands, and bound by his old sense of duty, he obediently accepts the mission. The tyrant hands him a small wooden box, and as our boy pops it open, a blinding light washes over his surprised face, revealing 4 fallen crests, retroactive magical organs designed to temporarily boost a soldier's power. Aster immediately sees through the supposed gift, provoking a defensive, hostile reaction from a blonde knight standing nearby. Our boy doesn't hesitate, driving a heavy punch straight into the knight's gut, before a spiky brown-haired soldier furiously explains the true cost of the corrupted crests. Gaining this artificial magic demands a blood sacrifice. Aster isn't having it, glaring at the Elmheim elites and roaring that his men aren't just disposable tools, as he screams about the countless lives already thrown away for their senseless war. But suddenly, a mysterious voice echoes through our hero's head to tell him his efforts are useless, and a shadowy entity looms right behind him. The dark presence declares that his fate can never be changed, completely engulfing Aster in a blinding wave of golden light. When the blinding light fades, our hero abruptly finds himself standing in a freezing, snowy forest, and he looks around in total confusion until a familiar voice calls him Captain. He turns to see his old squad staring back at him in the snow as the spiky brown-haired soldier jokes about him spacing out in the middle of a mission. Aster can only utter Brown's name in pure disbelief, before a blonde soldier named Silva chimes in to note that their captain looks like he just woke up from a dream. A sudden memory shows the wingless unit, a squad of soldiers without an ounce of magic who were treated as less than human. The vision plays out their shared history of surviving countless brutal battlefields together, only to end with all of them losing their lives and leaving Aster as the sole survivor in a sea of blood. As Brown shakes his shoulder, Aster realizes he hasn't regressed again. He's trapped in an artificial illusion, forced to watch the memory play out as his unit marches deep into enemy territory. But this time, he remembers the trap and urgently screams for everyone to fall back from the impending ambush. His men are completely baffled by the sudden order, but before they can even question it, a glowing red arrow pierces straight through a soldier's chest. Brown watches in absolute shock as his comrade drops to the snow, and panic erupts as the rest of the unit realizes they're surrounded by ambushers on the high ground. To make matters worse, the ambushers aren't just random rebels, they're magic-wielding knights, and they effortlessly overwhelm the wingless soldiers with vicious red energy blades. Pushed to the absolute brink, Silva pulls out the glowing purple fallen crest dagger, and even as our hero screams for him to stop, the desperate soldier plunges the cursed weapon straight into another comrade's chest. Instantly, a dark purple aura swallows the affected men, turning their eyes a sinister red as their bodies violently twist and mutate into massive bat-like monsters, and the newly born beasts unleash a terrifying roar. The mutated horrors immediately swoop down to massacre the very men they were just fighting alongside. Aster can only watch the nightmare unfold, his glowing yellow eyes reflecting the carnage, and he screams for it to stop as the winged beasts tear his unit to shreds. When the dust finally settles over the blood-soaked snow, a pair of boots steps into the aftermath, revealing Julius Elmheim, who casually remarks on the chaotic slaughter. One of the mutated soldiers, now a mangled blue wolf-like creature, crawls forward to beg Lord Julius for help, but without a single ounce of pity, Julius brutally slashes its throat mid-sentence. Covered in blood, he coldly wonders aloud which of his pawns that just was, while a battered Aster glares up from the snow, demanding to know why he's even here. Julius gloats that they finally finished hunting the rebels, thanking the unit for acting as the perfect bait, though he quickly sighs, clearly bored by the aftermath of the massacre, and mocks our hero for being the only one who refused to use the cursed crest. Staring down at the red snow, Aster coldly states that turning into a monster isn't how a human should die, but the blonde tyrant just arrogantly dismisses the fallen soldiers as small fry. Our boy suddenly stops in his tracks. Reliving this nightmare has only crystallized his true goal, so he grips his hilt and vows to burn Elmheim to the ground. He calls out to whatever unseen entity is pulling the strings, demanding they show themselves instead of gouging out his trauma from on high. The fake Julius snaps at being ignored, but Aster instantly blitzes past him, cutting the blonde down with a glowing red slash, radiating golden light as he tells the background character to get out of his way, declaring that his past isn't a freak show. The illusion shatters like glass, leaving him standing in the real world surrounded by a roaring vortex of golden energy. Aster looks up as a colossal shadow descends from the sky, and he stands completely unfazed with his hand resting on his blade as a massive, multi-winged purple dragon touches down before him to kick off the true trial. Our boy Aster stands completely unfazed before the great spirit of the seven wings. He notes that the massive dragon was supposedly furious about being trapped inside a cramped book, but flashing a mocking smirk, he points out the beast looks pretty comfortable out here in the wasteland and demands to know exactly how it accessed memories from his past life. Years ago, in that previous timeline, a younger Ash had tracked the beast down, begging the creature to teach him how to safely control his seven wings. He just wanted a simple conversation to figure things out, but the dragon answered by blasting him with a massive wave of crackling purple energy. Aster's eyes snap wide in sudden shock, and a colossal pillar of purple energy erupts from the earth, blowing our boy backward. He hits the edge of a crater, totally bewildered as a chilling voice echoes through the dust. The sheer scale of the blast leaves him momentarily paralyzed, while a swirling mass of dark magic declares its intent to eradicate the Elmheim bloodline. The entity finally reveals its true name, Fafnir, as a glowing red crest manifests on Aster's back, linking him to the massive dragon, who roars a promise to burn the Tyrant family to ash. Caught off guard by the sudden eruption of purple beams, our boy tumbles backward and swings his glowing red sword, desperately trying to talk the monster down, but the massive dragon just lunges straight for him. Aster can barely process the colossal creature's terrifying speed before Fafnir unleashes a devastating energy blast across the wasteland. The beast pours every ounce of its ancient wrath into the breath attack, forcing the teen to block the blast with his bare hand as the sheer pressure violently shoves him backward until the dragon suddenly recognizes the dark-hilted blade in his grip. Aster demands to know if the beast recognizes his weapon, so Fafnir drops a massive lore bomb. Gram is an accursed blade forged by the Elmheims for the sole purpose of slaughtering spirits. The realization claws at our hero as he stares at the hilt, horrified that his adoptive father handed him a spirit-killing weapon without a single warning. But Fafnir doesn't give him time to process, swatting the distracted teen away with a heavy strike and emerging from the dust to loom over his fallen body. It spreads its wings wide and roars that it has waited centuries for a chance to eradicate the Elmheim bloodline, while my guy desperately tries to explain from the dirt that his connection to the family name is a little complicated. The dragon refuses to hear it, charging a massive blast of purple energy in its maw as Aster grips his sword to brace against the overwhelming pressure. But Fafnir just unleashes a terrifying, earth-shaking roar. It flaps its massive wings to kick up a blinding storm of dust, and a massive explosion erupts right in front of our boy, sending debris flying in all directions. As the smoke clears, he notices that the beast's scales and wings are already severely battered. He asks what happened, and the dragon bitterly spits that the Elmheim family led the hunt against its kind. Centuries ago, humanity betrayed the spirits, slaughtering them to steal their wing crests and claim that ultimate power for themselves. Our boy is completely taken aback by the weight of this ancient betrayal, but the massive dragon admits that even after centuries, its hatred hasn't faded for a single second. Without warning, the beast snaps its massive jaws shut right around Aster, sinking its razor-sharp teeth deep into his flesh to claim him. It reveals that while its physical body is permanently trapped, it can use his 7 wings as a vessel to finally escape, and through the shattered remains of his metal mask, our hero suddenly hears the collective voices of the dead spirits echoing right inside his head. He desperately tries to dash forward and break free, but a massive manifestation of purple energy completely engulfs him. The sinister aura declares that he is nothing more than a mouthpiece for their eternal grudge, commanding him to quietly surrender his body and become the living sword that will exact their revenge. Fighting off the entity's crushing influence, Aster violently swings his blade and unleashes a frantic barrage of golden energy slashes. He fiercely strikes downward with his blade, but the dark energy physically manifests into a giant red dragon that clamps down first, trapping our hero inside its fiery, crushing maw. Aster's eyes just flare with defiant golden light as he casually complains about the beast mumbling while it chews on him, and he violently slashes upwards to break free, declaring that his pain and hatred are his alone. Channeling a blinding golden energy blade straight from his broken hilt, he flat out refuses to be controlled. Leaping high into the air, my guy winds up a devastating strike. He fiercely screams that he will never be a tool for anyone's revenge, and unleashes a massive sweeping golden slash that cleanly decapitates the giant dragon. Eyes blazing, our boy fiercely declares he has zero intention of being anyone's revenge tool, and backs it up by driving a glowing golden uppercut straight into the massive beast's jaw, sending the dragon crashing into the dirt, only for an unseen voice to dryly dismiss the whole effort as useless. The downed creature dissolves into glowing yellow light as the voice reveals it was just a phantom born from memories, and the real speaker finally shows itself as a massive decaying dragon chained to the desolate ground. Explaining it is nothing but a lingering ghost trapped by unfulfilled grudges. Aster just flashes a cocky smile, relieved that he won't accidentally kill his future teacher. But the massive decaying dragon cuts straight to the chase, acknowledging the kid's thirst for the power of the seven wings while questioning what exactly he plans to do with that kind of god-tier strength. The giant dragon notes that he has already peeked into our hero's head, seeing a highlight reel of deep betrayal and boiling anger directed squarely at his adoptive Elmheim family. The ancient beast recounts how his own brethren once trusted the human ancestors enough to share their magic, only to be brutally betrayed and slaughtered for it. The chained dragon declares that even as his massive body rots away, his hatred will smolder like a buried ember forever. Recognizing our boy as a kindred spirit who shares the exact same seven wings, which suddenly burn to life as a glowing red crest on the teen's back. Swirling with intense golden energy, the beast offers to lend him the raw power needed to completely wipe the Elmheim bloodline off the map. A tempting deal that Aster admits his past self would have taken without a second thought. Standing in the arena over the shattered pieces of Julius's metal jaw mask, our boy is officially off the leash, coldly declaring that if the dragon spirit's power is really that mid, he doesn't need it. Gripping his sword as golden energy flares around him, Julius stares in absolute shock at the boy's sudden freedom and the terrifying aura flooding the arena. A memory shows Duke Roderick's cold teachings about killing, but our hero's motivations have evolved, and he tells the massive decaying dragon in the mental space that his true goal is much harder now. When the giant dragon asks if he's simply abandoning his past grudges, Aster firmly denies it, picturing a dark future where he might have to face those horrific battles all over again. He resolves to fight only to protect the people most precious to him right now. Earlier, the teen manifested massive red energy wings to show he wanted power, not for revenge, but to rebel against the world's unreasonableness, and the giant dragon recognized the glowing aura, recalling a mysterious dark-haired woman who possessed that exact same power. The chained dragon admitted our boy actually had the vessel to bear the seven wings, but bluntly refused to teach him a thing, claiming there were no manuals meant for humans. Exasperated by the runaround, Aster asks what exactly he's supposed to face next, only for the voice to reveal he has to confront his own memories. Caught completely off guard, the teen is suddenly swallowed by a flash of golden energy, and as a massive tornado spins to life around him, the voice orders him to watch the power up close and learn. Once, long before any of this, a figure stood imposingly in a glowing light as Duke Roderick addressed his son, telling a frustrated Ash to use the man standing right in front of him as a role model. The patriarch then drew his blade, unleashing a wave of red and gold energy to demand the boy's acknowledgement. Suddenly, a blinding light erupts from a book on the pedestal, blasting our hero backward onto the library floor. The blonde-haired man in uniform rushes over, relieved to see Aster in one piece, and urgently asks if he managed to meet Fafnir to learn the secrets of the seven wings. Exhausted, the teen reveals he was actually invited back tomorrow, leaving the older man stunned that he tamed the misanthropic spirit. Aster fires right back, demanding to know why the blonde-haired man in uniform conveniently hid the spirit's massive grudge against his family name. He complains about the hell he just went through, but the older man just smiles at the kid's obvious progress, which forces Aster to reluctantly admit the ordeal was actually worth it. Thinking back on the terrifying memory construct of Roderick in his prime, He acknowledges that clashing swords with the monster was the perfect way to practice his own techniques. Our boy steps up to the glowing pedestal and sets a hard deadline to master this new power before the upcoming duel ceremony, scanning the mysterious glowing runes on the pages before formally asking the headmaster for permission to check the ancient text out. A few weeks later, Count Maze urgently yells for Aster to hold his fire on the training ground, completely blown away by the teen's rapid progress. Our hero stands victorious over a pile of defeated second-class students after wiping them all out without taking a single hit. Liliane stares in absolute shock at his newly formed weapon, and Aster proudly holds up the glowing red blade. He's finally starting to catch up to his father's monstrous strength. Count Maze watches from the sidelines, visibly relieved that our boy has finally tamed the volatile seven wings without losing his mind. Liliane steps up to settle a prior promise, and his teacher officially recommends him for the upcoming duel ceremony. The teen knows his grueling preparations are finally complete, locking in his resolve to take Julius down fair and square. Meanwhile, Julius is busy with his own intense training, blasting a massive door off its hinges with a fiery explosion. Helen Elmheim approached him to announce that his opponent for the ceremony had been locked in, and the masked teen stood in complete silence as his oppressive fire magic flared around his body. Helen emphasized just how high-profile this clash would be, noting that the king and countless knight nobles were set to attend. But it was the news that his father and brother would be watching that made Julius clench his flaming fist in pure determination. Pushed to his physical limits in the training room, Julius pants heavily earlier. Helen sternly reminded him that blowing his chance at revenge was completely unacceptable. She slid a mysterious black box in front of him, offering it as a trump card to make up for his inferior wing crest, before strictly ordering him to defeat the Seven Wings and prove Elmheim's absolute supremacy. Without warning, Aster's delayed red energy slashes strike Julius right in the back, triggering a massive fiery explosion. A dark, jagged mass melts and sizzles from the blistering heat, but the masked teen just stands there sweating, arrogantly mocking our boy's attack as a complete joke of a trump card. Stewing in anger, he placed his hand firmly on the small box Helen had given him. Refusing to rely on garbage, he shattered it in his grip, resolving to prove he was the strongest on his own. Glaring intensely as steam rose from his vents, he directed his fierce competitive drive straight toward Aster. As the shattered pieces of our hero's mask rain down on the arena floor, Julius stares him down, fiercely vowing that this time, he'll be the one to crush him. But our boy Aster isn't just resting on his laurels after that last clash. Knowing he has to fully master his Seven Wings power if he wants to actually put his brother in the dirt, he dives straight into the hidden book of the Seven Wings buried beneath the academy, and after a brutal training arc with the dragon spirit inside, he finally makes that monstrous golden magic his own. Meanwhile, Julius has been brewing a sinister plan of his own to crush our hero, setting the stage for their ultimate showdown. Over in the royal capital of Karma Vale, the streets are absolutely buzzing with festive energy for the upcoming duel ceremony, where a hyped-up kid points at a passing squad and mistakes them for full-fledged royal knights before his dad gently corrects him that they're just greenhorn cadets. Those rookies happen to be Aster and his crew, soaking in the cheers of the adoring public, while Liliane playfully nudges our guy, teasing him for giving the crowd the cold shoulder. Aster awkwardly rubs his neck, admitting that playing the dashing hero isn't exactly his style, but Bigger Smythe is absolutely eating up the spotlight, basking in the swooning gazes of the local women, while Nolan tells him to knock it off. Our hero just sighs at his squad's antics, feeling completely out of his element. A few days ago, Count Maze saw him off at the estate and promised they'd have a real heart-to-heart about Aster's future ambitions once the tournament wrapped up. Now strolling through the bustling festival, Aster mentions to Liliane that the Count is as elusive as ever, since he really wanted to show off his new trump card as thanks for all the help, though he notes the incredibly tight security around the grounds. Even though the main event isn't until tomorrow, Nolan warns that thugs might use the chaos to target the king, or assassins might try to eliminate their opponents ahead of the important matches, and right on cue, a mysterious cloaked figure brushes past the group and deliberately slams hard into our boy's shoulder. The stranger just keeps walking without a single word and melts right back into the crowd, prompting Smythe to notice Aster tense up and ask what's wrong. Aster brushes it off as nothing, while the cloaked figure quickly slips away into a quiet alley, sighing in relief, now that he thinks he's made a clean getaway, and reaches into his robes to admire his prize, playfully tossing our hero's stolen wallet into the air, until a glowing yellow magical slash suddenly grazes his cheek, and our boy steps into the alleyway, mocking how far public order in the capital has fallen, glaring down the pickpocket and demanding the wallet back if the guy wants to avoid the military police. But instead of panicking, the hooded man calmly compliments the teen's magic as dark, shadowy energy starts swirling around his own boots. Aster's eyes widen in sudden shock, because the cloaked figure dashes forward with blinding speed, instantly closing the gap to reappear right behind him for a lethal strike. Aster barely leans back in time to dodge the whistling blade, gripping his own hilt as he realizes this guy is using advanced shadow magic, and without missing a beat, our hero unleashes a massive golden energy slash that blasts the ambusher backward. But the cloaked figure just slides across the dirt to recover, praising the cadet's skills, then lunges right back in like a blur, forcing our boy to admit the attacker's reactions are extremely fast, and as Aster blocks the strike with his glowing red sword, he suspects this might be an assassin sent by the Elmheims. But before the deadly clash can escalate, a familiar voice yells out, and a massive wooden barrel suddenly flies out of nowhere, hurtling straight toward the hooded attacker's face. The heavy wood smashes into the cloaked figure and launches him backward through the air. So our boy stands ready, while the downed attacker groans in pain and recognizes the person who threw it. Kudo casually strolls into the alley with her giant black sword resting on her shoulder, greeting Aster by calling him a little brat. He just laughs nervously at his sister's sudden appearance and asks what she's doing here, but more importantly, why she just called this random pickpocket her senior. Kudo hauls the groaning man up by his cloak, explaining that he was actually a class above her back at the Knight Academy, and as the guy sits up rubbing his head, she introduces him as Stoner Valier, an active-duty royal knight. Now securely tied up in ropes, Stoner just smiles apologetically, claiming he couldn't contain his curiosity after hearing the famed Seven Wings user was in town. She furiously scolds him for resorting to a dishonorable sneak attack, but the tied-up knight just laughs it off without a shred of shame. So our boy silently notes the sheer hypocrisy of the sister who just hurled a barrel at a man's back, while Liliane watches the bizarre family dynamic unfold, mentioning she never expected Kudo to be dragged into city patrol duty, though Kudo explains it's a massive favor from her division commander, who enthusiastically insisted she take the shift to cheer on her little brother. And turning back to Stoner, she demands to know why a guy notorious for hating the public eye would go out of his way to mess with Aster, glaring at him until he gives a real answer, while Smythe and Nolan whisper in absolute shock, finally realizing this bound weirdo is actually the legendary Black Wolf. Smythe is still trying to figure out what that moniker means, so Nolan breaks it down, explaining that the knight is a master of surprise attacks who treats battlefields like his personal playground and lives up to every bit of his terrifying reputation. Liliane can't wrap her head around why an active-duty royal knight would target a mere cadet, and Stoner casually claims he just wanted to offer some friendly advice to his junior since he fought in the last duel ceremony. The mention of that last ceremony makes Aster pause as a sudden realization clicks into place. He recalls that 5 years ago, Stoner went head-to-head with Julius Elmheim in the arena, and lost. Looking down at the tied-up veteran, our boy decides to return the favor with some unsolicited advice of his own, coldly telling the senior knight to forfeit tomorrow's match. Because if he steps into the ring with his current skills, Elmheim will absolutely crush him. Aster immediately questions this bold advice to forfeit, and Alphen aggressively leans in to back him up, violently shaking the tied-up veteran because he's deeply offended anyone would doubt our boy's skills against Julius. But the captive just sighs, explaining that Aster's strength is exactly the problem, a point Stoner coldly echoes, warning that Elmheim won't just sit quietly and watch a fair fight. Aster narrows his glowing eyes, asking if his former family is already planning to interfere, and gets his answer when thick shadow ropes suddenly erupt from the ground, binding him, Alphen, and Nolan in an instant. Suddenly, that same voice from earlier echoes through the courtyard, casually roasting the ambushers for completely fumbling the bag, and the cadets look up in shock to find a cloaked figure standing on the high roof. It's Stoner Valier who smiles down at them and admits he was hired to force our boy to withdraw. The black-haired cadet immediately asks if Madame Helen is pulling the strings, while another cadet recognizes the intruder, disgusted that he's playing Elmheim's puppet again. She angrily accuses him of intentionally throwing his last duel before a silver-haired student fills in the blanks, revealing that Stoner was once praised as a once-in-a-decade genius. A quick cutaway to 5 years ago shows the prodigy catching a massive L from an Elmheim in the arena, and the student notes that rumors always swirled about the match being rigged from the start. Up on the roof, Stoner casually admits he should have been way more thorough with his little ambush, looking down at our boy to warn him that chivalry and fair play mean nothing to the elites, and that to protect their status they won't hesitate to bare their fangs at Aster's loved ones. He pulls up his hood, eyes glowing a sinister yellow as he strongly advises our hero to forfeit. Years ago, that exact threat of losing his family was already weighing heavy on our hero's mind. He turned away from a smoking building with a dead serious glare and glanced over his shoulder in a warm, hazy town square, until a familiar voice broke through his somber thoughts. Viscount Highfried playfully teased that his son didn't look much like a star about to take the big stage, while his adoptive mother warmly apologized for dragging him out to the festival when he was so busy. Aster quickly brushed the guilt off, but then realized his younger sisters were nowhere to be found, just as a sudden panicked commotion rippled through the startled crowd. In the center of the town square, Fran and Flair were putting on a flashy magic show. They cheerfully introduced themselves to the gathering crowd as the absolute cutest twin magicians in the world. The bystanders watched in awe, completely captivated by the glowing butterflies, until a panicked Aster shoved his way to the front, calling out their names. He caught them red-handed and was completely shocked that they were casually throwing around magic in the middle of the street. The girls just brushed him off, proudly boasting that they had been practicing hard while everyone was away, and whined that they never got a chance to actually show off their skills. They playfully looked up at our boy, expecting a little validation for their hard work. Aster tried to play the responsible brother, sternly warning them that the royal capital was dangerous and they needed to keep a low profile. But the girls completely ignored the lecture and excitedly promised to celebrate his upcoming victory with an even bigger display. They conjured a crackling blue orb right in front of his face, but suddenly froze in sheer terror as a dark, ominous voice called their names. Hyfried's wife stepped out of the shadows with a terrifyingly menacing aura, scolding them for recklessly throwing magic around in public and forcing the two troublemakers to cower and apologize profusely. Viscount Hyfried then confronted a sweating Aster as the old man brought up the wild rumors about our boy making a massive stir at the Night Academy. The Viscount pressed him on the details, asking if he was seriously going around threatening to crush the main Elmheim family. Aster looked downcast and apologized for selfishly jeopardizing his adoptive father's political standing, but Hyfried just smiled and told him there was no need to say sorry if this was the path he truly believed in. He admitted that, until recently, he would have hesitated to even bring their family out into the public eye. A peaceful vision of the estate's women flashed by as the old man reflected on the heavy stigma he had forced them all to bear because of his own past mistakes. Instead of being angry, Hyfried thanked our hero for finally clearing their name, absolving the boy of any blame, but that warm moment was suddenly hijacked by a sinister echo of the gray-haired intruder's warning, leaving Aster terrified that his righteous war might just get his precious family killed. Sensing that hesitation, Hyfried looked his son in the eye and insisted that backing down for their sake would be a massive mistake, proudly reminding him that the women of their house were more than strong enough to handle the fallout. He promised that as long as Aster walked a righteous path, his family would always stand by his side. A heartfelt vow that was suddenly interrupted by a cheerful shout from the girls. Eager to enjoy the rest of the festival, the group hurried along, with the Viscount walking beside our boy and expressing a little regret that Marfa couldn't join them, fondly joking that she would have been the only one able to keep the energetic kids in check. It was a perfect, peaceful night under the full moon. But that beautiful dream abruptly twisted into a nightmare, shifting to two armored guards stationed in a dimly lit hallway. Inside the bedroom, a hooded figure radiated a sickeningly dark aura. The intruder turned around with a sadistic smile, reminding Aster that he had been warned, and with his orange eyes glowing in the shadows, the gray-haired man threatened to take away every single person our hero held precious. The whole hall goes into a dead panic when they realize Flen has been snatched, and Viscount Hyfried's wife holds a sobbing Freya as the little girl chokes out how she woke up in the middle of the night. She remembers the hooded intruder standing in her room with an unconscious Flen slung over his shoulder, shushing the terrified kid into silence before vanishing straight into the shadows. The adults are left completely rattled by the breach, while outside, Kudo leads her squad and grits her teeth over their high alert status not being enough. She curses their own carelessness and the enemy's underhanded tactics, proving a past warning right that these elites will ruthlessly target loved ones just to protect their pride. Back inside, Aster deduces that Elmheim orchestrated the whole kidnapping using elite knights just to force him to forfeit. Our boy clenches his fist, ready to take matters into his own hands, but before he can walk away, a voice asks if he actually plans to give up. Alphen steps up, urging him to fight and make everyone acknowledge his true strength so the main family can never pull this garbage again. Earlier today, Alphen was already dropping the ultimate pre-game pep talk, telling our boy to leave his hesitation at the door and secure the W. Aster agreed with her, and a goatee sporting cadet chimed in, promising to handle the beautiful older sister on their end. Even Kudo stepped up to the plate, convincing their parents to attend the match so his victory wouldn't go unseen. A sudden wave of genuine support that left both Aster and the Viscount completely stunned. Stepping into the rescue strategy, Hyfried's wife instructed Kudo to take Freya along with her, revealing she had pulled a 5D chess move by slapping a tracking spell on all the kids beforehand, giving them a direct radar straight to Flen. With the pieces in place, the Viscount addressed the gathered group to ensure everyone was fully resolved, and as Aster looked at his makeshift army, his old academy instructor's advice about walking his own path finally clicked into place. Shaking off any lingering doubts, our boy resolves his thoughts and continues his solitary walk down the dimly lit stone corridor toward the arena. where he is suddenly intercepted by Lillian Elmheim, who taunts him about ignoring her little message. A blonde woman with pink eyes steps up to ask if his pride is really worth sacrificing his family's lives, but Aster doesn't miss a beat, confidently firing back that his people are much stronger than they realize. He pictures the rescue team already charging into danger and proudly acknowledges that his comrades have proven to be even tougher than he ever expected. Back then, our boy stood back to back with Lillian in the corridor and rudely cut off her threats, telling the old hag to shut up and watch. He left her seething with a bulging vein as he strolled out into the light, just as the announcer officially kicked off the ceremony in the packed arena. The entire audience snaps to attention as the King of Dorasil is formally introduced from the royal box. Aster and Nolan immediately place their hands over their chests to bow, but Julius flat out refuses to show respect, standing completely upright while Nolan hisses at him to get down. Our boy recalls standing on that very same dirt, hearing a voice call out to Duke Roderick in the stands. Julius had taunted him with a smug grin, claiming he only delayed this fight so his brother could master the 7 wings, and that crushing a weakling on such a grand stage would just bore the audience. Julius rests his blade on his shoulder, confidently declaring he's perfectly warmed up to kill him. The two fighters face off while the stadium roars around them, and the blonde brute flashes a sadistic smirk, trying to goad our boy into throwing the first punch. He looms over his silent opponent, mocking him for being too terrified by the hostile crowd to even speak, but a gray-haired spectator can only gasp in disbelief, as Aster just stares his brother down, casually stating how incredibly satisfying it's going to be to beat the absolute crap out of him right here. Meanwhile, in a remote holding room, Lillian is absolutely losing her mind over the news that Aster is actually stepping into the ring, screaming at a cowering Grion and furiously reminding him that they literally have a hostage to force a forfeit. Earlier today, Grion was already cowering in fear, as his purple-haired sister Lillian absolutely went ballistic, screaming to know if he'd even delivered the blackmail properly. The hooded kidnapper smoothly stepped in to defend his own work, claiming he only followed his instructions, and casually remarked on Aster's cold resolve to abandon his family, all while a bound and muzzled Flynn struggled helplessly on the couch beside him. Lillian just sighed in utter boredom, complaining that this whole scheme was a massive waste of her time, before she slowly approached the helpless captive and cruelly taunted the girl with the bitter reality that she had been completely discarded. Pressing her boot down hard onto Flynn's chest, the sadistic sister promised to torture her just to make an example out of her. Lillian flashes a twisted grin and a knife, warning the rebellious cadets that if they try anything stupid, she'll chop the hostage into tiny pieces. Pinned to the couch, Flynn can only pray that Freya noticed the tracking spell in time, and when one brave cadet tries to rush the psycho sister, Lillian casually blasts him backwards through the air. The rest of the squad freezes in shock until a familiar voice rings out from the balcony above. Lillian snaps her head up with a furious glare, while the hooded kidnapper just smiles like he's watching a primetime drama as Kudo and the rescue team stare down from the high ground, declaring they've finally come to take their family back. Down in the arena, our boy tosses his coat aside to the roar of the crowd and grips the magic sword Graham as it flares with blood-red energy, ready to give his brother the brutal rematch he's been begging for. He launches himself into the air, screaming that it's time to finish what they started, while Julius just stands his ground, resting his own weapon casually on his shoulder. But with his golden eyes burning and that colossal red blade locked on its target, my guy is finally ready to settle the score once and for all.